People of Reddit who knew celebrities before they were famous. How different do they act now? I live in the town where Dolly Parton grew up, and practically everyone above the age of 50 who grew up here claims to either be a distant relative of Dolly's or they claim to know her in some way. Everyone has their story of the time they met Dolly. It's pretty obvious, but regardless of who you talk to, Dolly has always been sweet and generous, but everything has simply grown exponentially due to her fame. Examples are the millions of books she gives out for free to children around the globe each month, or how she gave out $10,000 cash to many of my close friends after their houses burned in a fire a couple years back. Thousands of people are employed here and work for one of the businesses she owns, and it's a tad strange to see when you walk in, but the birthing center at the local hospital is funded by and named after her. I honestly can't think of one person I know who doesn't like her. Dolly's heart has only gotten bigger because of fame. So this is, of course, the first story that we're going to read here, and I'm going to go out and say that this is going to be one of the few exceptions of someone who maintains their humility once they, quote, make it big in the real world and, start making a bunch of money. I think we're going to run into a lot of stories of people who just kind of turn into these selfish, narcissistic divas, and, these stories aren't always going to have happy endings. So yeah, I just want to throw that out there early. Let's see if I'm right. Story 2. When I was really young, I'd go to the reptile park, originally owned by Bob Irwin and passed on to his son Steve. Steve was always nice, would do all the lizard and croc shows, would hang out and chat afterwards. My dad would take me there occasionally, and Steve would seem to remember us, treated everyone like an old buddy. This was before he became famous, obviously, and the small reptile park became the Australia Zoo. In my final year of high school, I got in the zoo for work experience, and they let me stay on. Steve was rarely there, and when he was, he'd avoid guests, because they would swarm him and he'd get nothing done. But when I did run into him, he was always super nice and still acted like that old friend. Didn't say crikey nearly as much as you'd think. That's definitely something Aussies say, but he really played that up for the cameras as his catchphrase. Unfortunately, he died later that year, so right up till the end, he was just a lovely person. Edit. Getting a lot of similar questions and comments, so 1. No, I'm not from Beerwah. I had to travel 45 minutes each day to get to the zoo. It was worth it. 2. Aussies do say crikey. I think it's more of a Queensland thing and usually said by older generations. 3. Steve's dad Bob is an awesome dude who I also had the pleasure of meeting outside the zoo. Fun story. First time I ran into Steve while working there, he was holding 2 coconut halves up to his chest like a bra and sheepishly put them behind his back when I walked into the staff area as the others around him burst out laughing. It was some joke. Forget what it was. I just walked in at a very awkward moment. Story 3. My grandpa, R.I.P., owned a grocery store in Miami in the late 70s. Wesley Snipes and his friends once stole some candy from his store, and when he caught them, he let them have it. Since then, Wesley and his friends were regulars. Once, Wesley left his bike in front of the store and it got stolen. It was a pretty bad idea. My grandpa gave him the old bike that he kept in the back of the store. My uncle took over in 2001 when my grandpa died. In 2007, he came back to the store while my uncle and cousin were there to ask about my grandpa. My uncle said that they talked for a little over an hour about how my grandpa treated him like a son. When he found out my grandpa passed, he felt guilty he didn't visit sooner. He embraced my uncle and cousin and left. My uncle said he told them they plan on having the building repainted while they talked. About a week later, a crew of painters arrived and told my uncle they were already paid to have the building repainted. Such a genuine dude. Story 4. Not personally, but everyone in my town has a Dave Chappelle story. I worked with a guy who said he knew him. I called BS. We then met Dave and they were actually friends. Basically, no one in town thought he would be much. Now he's a local hero, really down to earth. You literally see this man just chilling in the park in normal cheap clothes. Nothing has changed him. You wouldn't think he was famous. Maybe homeless, but not famous. Edit. I should have said wrinkled clothes, like he fell asleep and then just woke up and left. I didn't see any logos and brands. People seem upset I said cheap clothes. I have no clue as to what he was wearing. Still, super nice guy. You wouldn't think he was famous. Story 5. Bruno Mars's mom was a bartender at a local karaoke dive bar that I was a regular at. At the time, his biggest hit was The Hook for Billionaire by Travie McCoy. Anyway, she was selling tickets for an upcoming concert he was having, and she asked our table if we wanted to buy some. My friend declined, and she exclaimed, "Why not? He's my son." I ended up getting a couple of tickets despite not knowing any of Bruno Mars's songs. It turned out to be one of the best concerts I've ever been to. The guy knows how to put on a good live show. The tickets were only $40 each, I think. His opening act was a local group of large Polynesian men singing Motown who went by the name Nesian 9. They were pretty good too. The next time he was in town for a concert, he had blown up and the tickets were going for $400. I would have loved to see him again, but not at that price. His mom was really nice, down to earth, and a pretty good singer herself. R.I.P. Bernie. At least she lived long enough to see her son's success. Story 6. I know this is not what the question is asking, it's sort of the other way around. Have you met a famous person who is as nice as people say? But it's about Tom Hanks. It has to be told. My cousin worked at a legal chambers in London, and they were told a film crew was coming in to use it for a few weeks. They were told, don't engage with the actors, just go about your business. The film was The Da Vinci Code, and, as per above spoilers, Tom Hanks was in it. For a day or three, they all did as they were told, kept their heads down, until eventually Tom Hanks came and knocked on their lunchroom door. Basically just said, sorry for messing up where you work, can I join you for lunch? And then it was on. Every day, breakfast and lunch, where time permitted, Tom Hanks was hanging out with these guys like he was a new employee, reading the newspaper, making cups of tea, getting in the bacon rolls or whatever, calling people's family members to say, hi, it's Tom Hanks, for a laugh just to see this reaction. Basically, after a couple of weeks, was just like one of the team. Everyone on first name terms, just genuinely nice. Last day, he made sure to say bye to everyone. He brought them all some kind of gift. I can't remember what, but it was really low-key, inexpensive, but personal, which was a nice touch. Just a really wholesome time for everyone. People say Tom Hanks is an absolute lad, and it transpires he is. Story 7. Kurt Cobain wrote this for his girlfriend at the time, Tracy Marander. They lived together for a while, and she took the photo that's on the album cover. Marander didn't know the song was about her until she read about it years later in the book Come As You Are, The Story of Nirvana. According to Chad Channing, who was Nirvana's drummer at the time, Cobain didn't have a title for this song when he brought it to the studio. Chad told Songfacts, quote, I remember we were rehearsing the song not long before we went in and recorded the record, Bleach. Kurt was just playing the song and we were working it out. I asked Kurt what the song was and Kurt was like, well, I don't really know. And then I said, well, what's it about? And he says, it's about a girl. And I said, well, why don't you just call it About a Girl? And he just kind of looked at me and smiled and said, okay, we went with that. Story 8. I knew Robert Pattinson about 15 years ago. Nice guy, friendly, a lot of fun to be with. He lived by himself in the Sitter of Soho, London, in a tiny one-bed flat that I think he felt like was the romantic version of a starving artist, or at least wanted to. He had a weird side. He'd say random, violent, depraved things. He was obsessed with Jack Nicholson. He never really gave a F. He had confidence, and he was always himself, and he knew he could be deliberately contradictory, and he used that as a personality trope. But he was a good guy, and I get the impression he's very comfortable with himself now that he's developed his career, that he acts very well, and that he can pick and choose his roles based upon what he wants to do and who he wants to work with. Twilight for him was always a means to an end, and I think he worked it very much to his benefit and didn't compromise himself. Story 9. Jennifer Lawrence. I moved to Louisville middle of 7th grade year. She was my first friend, and the first person I had a sleepover with. We hit it off. She was very different from me. A cheerleader, came from a lot of wealth, but her family was really awesome, and we were both kind of weird and outgoing, so we became good friends very fast. Her family owned a farm that had a children's summer camp, hi-ho, and we went to it a couple of times. She had one of her birthday parties there. I remember her kissing our friend John under a trampoline. We talked about it for way too long. We hung out fairly often until she moved to NYC a year and a half after we met. We started taking acting classes together in 8th grade at a local theater here in town, Walden Theater. It's funny because on our first date, we had no idea we were both taking the class. I walked into the first one and there she was. We were both so excited to have a friend. We were in the first level of theater, but after a couple weeks, both moved into the intermediate class, where we were the oldest people in the class, so that's why they moved us up so fast. We carpooled together to Walden Theater every Tuesday and Thursday for acting class. I would ride the bus home with her, her mom would take us to class, then my mom would pick us up and take her home. She was a natural at acting, I'll tell you that. I was still somewhat shy, but she could pretty much be any given character, and even though she was 14, you'd believe it. She always talked about how she had a photographic memory, and that's how she was able to remember lines so easily. And she did. It was insane. I've read where she said she's had no prior acting, but this isn't true. I'm not sure if she said this for a part of her look, or maybe she considered it informal, but we definitely took acting classes our entire 8th grade year. I will say, what you see with her is what you get. She was always very quirky, kind of weird, which was funny because she was so preppy presenting, but really wasn't like that. She was very loud, made her presence known. It's been bizarre seeing her in interviews because she acts the exact same. I remember she moved to NYC to pursue modeling between 8th and 9th grade. It worked because soon after, she was in a commercial for Burger King and a couple of MTV's My Sweet 16 commercials as well. She was doing online classes in our high school, Ballard High School, and came to visit one time in 9th grade and another in 10th grade. I squealed when I saw her. I genuinely missed her. I had no idea she was about to become one of the most famous actresses of our generation. I always hear she comes to town for holidays, but at this point, I have no idea how to contact her. She had a private Facebook for a while, assuming it was really her, for a time. I had a few fake accounts for her request to be my Facebook friend, along with a lot of people we went to school with. The last time we spoke was for my 21st birthday. I'm 29 now, but I would love to catch up with her. I can't help but wonder if she remembers me. I still have her yearbook photo she signed hanging up in my room. Our yearbooks and a couple photos from a disposable camera. So just based on the information shared about the interaction with Jennifer Lawrence, I would say, to answer your final question, she most definitely remembers you. Those aren't things that just go away the more people you meet. If it's someone that made a significant impact on your life, particularly at a young, impressionable age, those memories don't fade. So yeah, I would say that Jennifer Lawrence definitely still remembers you. But yeah, I hope you guys get to catch up. Story 10. I'm from Oxford in the UK and knew Emma Watson when I was in school. She was a massive bully, a strong Regina George vibe going on, and bullied my friend's sister in her year so badly that my friend's sister had to leave school. The school was refusing to do anything about the bullying issue because Emma was their marketing tool. At every open day, all the teachers would proudly tell prospective parents in a reverent, hushed tone, "Did you know that Emma Watson goes to our school?" Emma just has a really bad rep in Oxford. At one point, she dated one of my friends from another school, and let's just say that the relationship did not last because of her extreme anger management issues and cruelty towards people whom she considered beneath her, like restaurant staff, etc. I was younger than Emma, so thankfully never needed to interact much with her. But here is an incident that will continue to haunt me for the rest of my life. I was hanging out with friends in central Oxford one weekend, and we decided to go to the covered market. As we were making our way to the market through the little alleyways, we ran into Emma Watson with her gang of friends standing around some girl, who was clearly younger than her and at least a foot shorter than her. Emma was screaming at her, I don't even remember about what, and hitting the girl on the shoulders and chest with her bag. I'm ashamed to say that me and my friends did not do anything. We just kind of ran away, which was dumb in retrospect. To summarize, Emma Watson was badly miscast. She would have made a brilliant Draco Malfoy. Story 11. West Auckland Kiwi who went to school with Daniel Logan. I know, not that famous. Paging subreddit prequel memes for backup. All the way from new entrants and through several years of high school. Even did drama with the guy. He was a little crap at primary school, but really, who wasn't? He got pretty arrogant / insufferable at high school off the back of AOTC. I don't know him well at all nowadays, but I'm under the impression he's chilled out and is basically milking the pop culture convention scene. Don't think he's really done much else other than satisfy George Lucas's urge for the fets to be a little exotic. Story 12. I used to party a lot with Joji in Tokyo many years back before he blew up with 88 Rising. He hung out a lot with international kids there, and it's quite a tight-knit community for those who know. It's usually the same parties and party people out among us, and many knew him as Filthy Frank back then. Down to earth and still chill. But he's been quite busy as of late, so it's been a while since we last saw him, but he's still cool, so it seems. Story 13. I used to go fishing at the Hawthorne Creek with Chris Hansen when we were teenagers. He used to be such a friendly and easygoing dude. We would drink beers and shoot the crap about girls and school and stuff. He would always share his catch with me too. As things go, we drifted apart after high school. I randomly ran into him again just a few years ago when I was visiting this girl's house for a date. I had been chatting with her online for a bit, and had set up a movie night for just the two of us, so imagine my surprise when my old fishing buddy was there. He came into the kitchen while I was waiting for her to get the DVD. I had told her she needed to watch Roadhouse because that movie rocks. It had been a long time since we'd seen each other, but he recognized me. Unfortunately, instead of a friendly, "Hey, long time no see, buddy," he was fairly rude and acted like a huge jerk. Kept asking me all these personal questions. I guess the fame and ego really went to his head, because he had a camera crew following him around too. Talk about narcissistic. So after the very first story, I made the prediction that the majority of these stories would be people that changed after finding fame. And the reason I said that is because I live in Los Angeles and, I've had plenty of interactions with people. If we have time at the end, I might share a few stories myself. But absolutely, these people that you meet in real life are just absolute buttholes about literally the tiniest things for seemingly no reason. So I'm just trained to think that way. But we have had some stories so far about people that, what you see is what you get, and they truly are genuine people. But this story right here, story 13 with Chris Hansen that was just read out, this is more of what I'm familiar with and what I expected the majority of stories would have been. So let's continue on and see if that's right. Story 14. I went to high school with Sandra Oh. She was funny, dynamic, smart, outgoing, and very into drama. In one school play, she played what I will call sort of a mime character. She didn't have lines, but was still a big part of the action, commenting on what was going through her actions. Anyhow, in one scene, she was exiting the stage as she banged her head on one of the props. You could hear the loud bang, but she was a pro and just carried on. It's been great to see her have such success, and I love that she's kept in touch with her close friends from high school. You can spot them at award shows sometimes. Story 15. I went to a very small, arts-oriented high school with Amelia Meath, one half of the duo Sylvan Esso. She was a grade above me. Never friends, barely acquaintances. Hung out a few times at a party where kids smoked weed at lunch/after school. Can't really recall, but I do strongly recall her having a wonderfully friendly, creative, and uninhibited personality. I admired her. I've hung on to a little memory of her for years, since way before she got famous with Mountain Man and Sylvan Esso. I remember her jovially approaching silly, stoned freshman me as we crossed paths in a foyer, and commenting excitedly about the shirt I was wearing. Dark blue with a ring of little brown platypuses encircling it. Are those platypuses? I love platypuses. Awesome shirt. It was my favorite shirt, and I loved her enthusiasm for it. As far as I can tell, she's still a unique, genuine, creative, eccentric person. Super happy she's found some recognition making cool music and doing her thing. Story 16. Two friends of mine both got famous, one more than the other. One took it in stride and really didn't change much besides driving nicer cars and wearing better suits. He's still a solid dude and we stay in touch. The other one really committed to the whole public image deal, and I'm a bit dirty to be associated with, I guess, because we knew each other back in my hustling days. I think the fame got to him, gave him too big of a head. He also is all about how God is responsible for all my success image, and that's lame in my opinion. I guess God just doesn't like all the other actors grinding out there, and I know plenty better than him who aren't famous. Or maybe I'm just jealous. Story 17. Eminem was seriously a crazy cool dude who was just all about trying to get his music out there. A neighbor of mine was a DJ and he would come over often. Back then, I remember hearing his early stuff and I could dig it because I primarily listened to a lot of local rappers and helped produce music. He would dye his hair pink back then before the blonde. He celebrated his birthday one year, I think 25 or 26, at a local bar and we all came out, drinking like fish all night. I remember it because my buddy and I had to call his GF to drive us back to his place to crash. I stopped producing music and went on to different things, and didn't follow him until he made it big with the Slim Shady album. Of course now, it's very public how his life has taken many ups and downs since like 20-something years ago, but I'll always remember how cool as crap he was, and how he has always complimented all the music he heard. Story 18. I was so close, but I never got to meet David Bowie. I love him and have ever since childhood. When reaching adulthood, suddenly it was having people around me who knew him. That was just mind-blowing. And they all said the one same thing. There's not a humbler person on this planet. One of them was his best friend and had been from childhood, and the other one had been his assistant. When visiting the BFF's house, they had pictures up on the wall from different occasions celebrated with David and his family, pictures from childhood, etc. The assistant said on her first day she was so nervous about screwing up and missed that he got in. He looked at her, smiled, introduced himself, and asked if he could fix her a cup of tea, and he did. She said that everybody working for him loved him, because he looked after everyone with a genuine heart. Story 19. Vinnie Jones. I guess he was still somewhat of a celebrity, but before he was a big celebrity, he played for Wimbledon FC in the 90s. He was my next-door neighbor when I was a child living with my parents in Hemel Hempstead. Our families intermingled occasionally, but my mum and his wife were the closest. From what I remember, real nice guy with a lovely, respectable family. Not sure if he was a geezer, as I'm sure he toned himself down for when there were kids around. Seeing my dad Sunday, I'll ask him what he was like. Story 20. Obligatory not me, but post here. My dad worked with Sacha Baron Cohen for 2 years on an awful kids TV show where they just pissed about until it got canceled because another guy working on it started stripping in front of some teenagers. Apparently, the character for Borat came from that show because Sacha just did stupid interviews purposely, messing it up. He was nice, but really arrogant, and then got a bit more arrogant after he became famous. My parents met him in a restaurant years later. Dom Jolly also worked in the same building before he was famous, and the idea of doing comedy to members of the public was stolen from Sacha. Also, Matt Lucas knew Sacha before he got famous, and apparently he was a massive twat then and probably became an even bigger twat. Story 21. I was local production contact on Hugh Jackman's touring theater production where he sang his favorite numbers from various musicals. Usually when a show comes in with big-name stars, the star usually has a bunch of assistants and they do the job they're paid to do, and that's it. The actor comes on stage when needed and then back to their dressing room, and if you need anything or if they need anything, you talk to the assistant. Prior to the first performance, I'm on stage dealing with a few little issues, trying to stay on schedule when Mr. Jackman walks out on stage, and my first thought was that he was going to be angry that we've kept him waiting to do a sound check. Instead, he walks directly over to me, introduces himself, asks me my name, and asks a couple of questions, and doesn't even mention the delays. So we spoke for a few minutes, and then he went around and introduced himself to more of the local crew. I was a little blown away by meeting him, as I'm a fan, and thought that was really cool of him. Fast forward a week, and I'm backstage after the performance, and I bump into Mr. Jackman in the hall. I say hi, but don't want to bother him, but he stops me. He remembers my name, after meeting hundreds of people that week, and asks a few questions that related to our first conversation. Here's the thing, though. The guy just did a 2-hour performance, and instead of just politely returning my greeting, he stopped and talked for a few moments with no false sincerity. To this day, I'm still blown away by how genuinely nice he was and always wondered what he was like before he became famous. He would also spend a huge amount of time after the show signing autographs and answering questions at stage door. So really quickly, on the topic of Hugh Jackman, I just remembered I was on Instagram one day and a video just happened to pop up, and it was this guy that was interviewing Hugh Jackman, but there is a bit of a backstory that the person interviewing had in that he took PE class with Hugh Jackman, like back when Hugh Jackman would teach at school. He was a PE teacher, and this guy was in his class, and now many years later, 10, 15 years later, he's got this role of interviewing people, and he starts the interview, and then Hugh Jackman, before even answering the question, he's like, hold on a second. I know you probably don't think I remember you, but I absolutely remember you, calls him by name, and you were in my PE class back in blah, blah, blah. And I remember the interview was just so stunned to hear that. It was crazy. So yeah, Hugh Jackman just seems to be a really awesome dude. Story 22. I worked at a coffee shop with a girl who's now on the CW show Riverdale. Won't say which girl, but she's a main character. All my coworkers thought she was a female dog because, well, she would say whiny things to people. One day, she said something that got under my skin a little bit, so I clapped back with an insult to her. She stared at me in stunned silence for a moment before saying, "There we go," and offering me a high five, and suddenly, boom, I understood her. She's a gorgeous girl, but from then on, I don't know, I saw her as a sister. She's actually super warm and kind of funny. Her sense of humor is just so dry, it can sometimes come across as her being mean. I now work at a hotel where famous people end up at. I bumped into her a few times. Mind you, this is years after she left that coffee shop, and she still runs over to me and gives me a hug, remembers inside jokes, and seems to have not changed at all. Awesome human, and I hope she continues to climb the Hollywood ladder. I also went to high school with a dude who was a top 10 American Idol contestant. He hasn't changed either, but he was always a jerk, so what you gonna do? Story 23. My mom continuously turned down Billy Ray Cyrus. They lived in the same town and went to the same high school, Flatwoods, Kentucky. Some of the details have been jumbled, but it's something along the lines of Billy's dad had a thing for my mom. Thought she was a good, family-starting, religious Southern girl. He pushed Billy to pursue and date her, which he tried to do. Asked her out all the time. Well, obviously, Mom said no. Denied him just as much as he asked. Life went on, she met my dad. Well, not long after they'd gotten together, probably a few years since Mom had even seen Billy Ray, he calls her, personally, and begs her to be in his music video for Achy Breaky Heart. Dad told her no. It's been kind of a family joke that Achy Breaky Heart is about my mom. Overall, I guess he wasn't an awful guy. Not overly rude or excessively nice, just not the first guy you'd invite to a party. Story 24. Not an interesting story, and this person isn't even a celebrity per se. She's currently a local counselor. Hard to explain the political hierarchy, but it's basically like a subordinate of the city's mayor. City's divided into wards. Each ward is headed by a counselor. Of my place. In brief, she's kind of a political hotshot with big influence. Before all of this, she used to be my mom's friend. Their offices were in the same area, so they traveled by the same bus every day for over 10 years. They grew to be friends. We've even gone for dinner at her house multiple times. After she became a hotshot, it's like she doesn't even know us. We once had a water crisis in our area for a few days. Going to the municipality was futile. So the entire neighborhood went to appeal her as she was the counselor. My mom was one of the people at the forefront since she knew her, but she pretended not to know my mother. When Mom reminded her, the reply was, "Oh yes, I remember," with a fake smile. In the end, we got back water after a week, but it wasn't due to any part by her. Story 25. My mom went to school with Heath Ledger, or a school close to his. Boarding schools, man. IDK. I just know that she saw him in school relatively often. Apparently, he was a jerk in high school. I feel bad saying that about a dead man, but my mom says it's true. Apparently, he was like those exaggerated jock bully guys in movies and TV shows. He walked into a room with his lackeys behind him and just commanded the place. At some school dance or something, he was in the middle of the room doing his thing, and literally everyone else was lined up against the walls because they didn't want to get in his way. He went to this prestigious boarding school. Everyone knew that his parents were rich, but he dressed all grunge and tried to act like a troubled kid living in poverty, which is ironic because I went to a school with troubled kids living in poverty, and they all pretended to be super rich and popular like he was. He was apparently really rude. He pushed people around and pretty much was only ever nice to people in order to manipulate them. I'm sure my mom has more to say about him. She ranted about him for a couple hours the other day. She says that he could have got better and nicer as he got older. To be honest, IDK what the general public opinion of him is, or really anything about him. So IDK if he actually did get any nicer. All I know is what my mom has told me. But she knew him as that over-exaggerated bully character. Story 26. I went to middle school with Robert Downey Jr. It's weird seeing him in movies, especially in the mid to late 80s, as he has some of the same quirks he had as a teenager, especially that quick-talking, wisecracking thing he often does. To me, it often seems like he's just acting exactly like that same kid that I knew. True story. We were both in drama class, which I hated, and the instructor often teased him, saying things like, quote, "Robert, why are you even here? We all know your father is going to get you jobs left and right." For those of you that don't know, his father, Robert Downey Sr., was a successful director and producer. Another true story. One time I saw some kids beat the crap out of him because he started dating a girl that one of them liked. Story 27. My ex-boyfriend was friends with Bill and Melinda Gates. He met them back in the mid-90s, non-profit philanthropy scene. My ex always had the sweetest stories about them. Like, they're genuinely good people. We were invited to Melinda's 50th birthday party. Ended up not being able to go, and I didn't end up meeting them myself, but I met a lot of Bill's first employees. They were just lovely people. Had lots of fascinating stories from when Microsoft first started, and they all lived in nice big houses. Fun fact, Bill actually goes by the name of Trey with family and friends. Bill is his birth and public name. Story 28. I was close to a now very famous person back when they were in school, and I give them a call once in a while when I have news about something from back in the day. like if someone dies, our school getting knocked down, etc. He's still very much the same person, and he's always glad to hear from me, but I get the impression that he's wary about what he tells me in case I sell the info to a magazine or whatever, and it feels like he's always just waiting for me to ask him for something, even though I never have before. We catch up for coffee about once every 3 years or so when we're both in the same town at the same time, and to be honest, I cannot tell you a single thing about his life, which makes me sad. Story 29. I used to work in retail with this girl. She would work in the shop part-time, study and go for auditions to be in adverts or whatever. She didn't think she had it in her. She always felt she lacked hotness because she wasn't mixed heritage. Where I come from, being Pan-Asian, Asian mixed with European, gets you places because you're considered exotic. We hung out. She was a cool chick. Whenever we went out, she would make sure she had exact change for things and was super petty about everyone just paying for their own crap, because she always said, quote, "I'm not the Reserve Bank." Rightly so. We were all like that because we were always broke. Anyway, fast forward to a few years later. She's now a famous radio DJ, done a lot of print and TV ads, hosting, presenting, etc., etc. We're still good friends, and she has no air about being famous at all. When we go out now, she just pays for stuff and insists on spending. Just the most chill and laid-back chick. We as her friends always have a laugh when we go out with her and see strangers do a double take. We sometimes casually mock her for being a public figure, and she just cringes. Fun fact. She dated a tattoo artist for a couple years, pre-fame, that tattooed a very famous TV chef. He was super chill too. Story 30. Went to high school with Dimebag Daryl Abbott from Pantera. I didn't really know him as he was a year or so ahead, but he saved me from getting picked on by ropers in the hall one time, and I got to meet him at a few gigs and parties and stuff. Let me tell you, when Pantera walked in the bowling alley, you knew they were there. Even got to take bong hits with him in his room once. He was still just this regular dude to us. As I continued to run into him at places through the years, strip clubs and Guitar Center, he never remembered my name, but always at least acted like he remembered me or treated me and others like old friends and not just fans. Last time I saw him was at a mobile sound place in Arlington with his blue goatee sometime around when Far Beyond Driven came out, and he was still just as chill and casual to me as ever. And I'm pretty sure he was like that with all of his fans. R.I.P. Story 31. Justin Bieber went to my high school when he was in grade 7 or 8 at the time, and he used to walk around school telling people to give him money. This was before he got really famous. It was around the time he started sending YouTube videos to Usher. Anyways, he used to say, "Hey, give me lunch money. Don't you know who I am? I'm Justin Bieber." People would just laugh and walk by. One time, my BF caught Justin and his friend pulling flowers out of the garden bed at our school, and my BF made Justin and his friend replant the flowers before they left the scene. On another occasion, my younger sister was at a hockey game with her friends, Justin and his friends. Justin asked my sister if he could put his arm around her, and she said no. He then called her a pizza face, except he used the insult wrong as he was referring to her freckles. I hope he's a better person now than he was back then. He used to walk around his hometown with such arrogance. Story 32. I was friends with Chester Bennington my freshman year of high school. We had a bunch of classes together and would hang out at lunch, and a bit after school. We would ride bikes together some afternoons on days when he didn't want to go home. Poor guy was always picked on. He wore glasses, had tight curly hair, and his ears stuck out a little. He was a really skinny kid. Plus, his name was Chester. Total bully fodder. He was quiet but funny. I suspected he was smoking pot, but I didn't think he was into the heavy drugs yet. The next year, his dad moved, or just moved Chester to a different school. Unfortunately, while it was still in the same metro area, in Phoenix, it was too far away to hang out without a car. I lost track of him after that. Super happy he found success, and you could hear his history in his lyrics. The days after his death were hard for me, and I think of him still. Miss that guy. Story 33. I dated Millie Bobby Brown's big sister. Millie is 11 from Stranger Things. I matched her on Tinder of all places. Didn't know who she was, but she was pretty quick to ask me if I had seen Stranger Things, to which I had strategically said no and hoped she would say, "OMG, it's the best show, we gotta watch together or something, haha." Little did I know, she would go on to tell me her sister has a lead role in the show. It was season 1 at this point. We went on 3 dates, talked a lot, we kissed, but then she told me she might be moving to America, and of course the messages slowed down after that until she eventually moved. I haven't spoken to her properly since around season 2, but she wished me a happy birthday this year. Anyway, I only met Millie once, but she's exactly the same if you've ever seen her in an interview or anything, but obviously quite different to the role she played on screen. Story 34. This might not count as much, but I vaguely knew Gugu Mbatha Raw before she became a successful actress. She lived in the same town, had a mutual friend. Our mutual friend was one of her best friends, so that's how I met her a few times. Really sweet, bright girl. Definitely had something about her. This was 1998. Many years later, in 2011, I'm working in a phone shop when I see her coming in. She's done several movies and TV shows by this point, and is pretty well known, though not hugely famous, despite one of the shows she'd done being Doctor Who. She comes in by herself and has a problem with her phone, so I help sort it out. I don't think she recognized/remembered me, as we were never really friends, but we chat and she's still really cool, funny, engaging, and down to earth. She's also the most beautiful woman I've ever seen in my life. As I was helping with her phone, I ask if she's got plans for the summer, etc., and she casually mentions that she's doing a bit of traveling in the States. Turns out she was doing a promotional tour of her latest movie, Larry Crown, with Tom Hanks. Years later, I'd see her occasionally walking through town, after she'd done more movies, TV series in the US, and was definitely more high profile. Always by herself, no entourage, no security or anything, just happily chilling in the town she grew up in. Story 35. I knew Craig Ferguson when I was a kid in Cumbernauld. He always came across as very self-confident in a way I found quite scary. He was a couple of years older than me, but him and some of his mates used to hang out at the riding school outside of town, where my family kept a pony. It was a scruffy, rat-infested kind of place, run by an old bloke and a lot of kids. Early to mid-teens, maybe, used to congregate there. Some had horses/ponies of their own, and some just hung out. I don't know why this wee gang started coming. Maybe they were friends of the old bloke's daughter. They were always to the fore with whatever projects were afoot. Knocking down old walls, whitewashing buildings, hosepipe fights, rugby in the paddock. I kind of thought of him as a bully at the time, but really think it was just his personality was so overwhelming to me as an introverted younger girl. If I saw him in town, I'd get teased. If I was on my own, I would try to avoid the streets they hung out on. However, when the local paper sent a reporter and photographer to do a piece on the riding school, and I was getting left out of it because I had broken ribs from a riding accident, he brought the photographer over to me and made sure I got included. So probably he was like a big puppy that didn't realize how scary it could seem to smaller creatures, but no actual harm in him. Edit. In that disclaimer at the start of his novel, Between the Bridge and the River, where he says the standard bit about any resemblance between characters and real people being entirely accidental, anyone from Cumbernauld at the time could name the teachers described in the first chapter. Story 36. I knew Obama when he was just a senator in the Illinois State Senate. He's nice, but he's not as good of a speaker as he seemed while in office. It's clear he rehearsed those speeches because in normal conversation he stammers a lot. Not like a stutter, but he trips over his words a lot. He doesn't talk much unless you bring up sports or politics. Michelle was the conversationalist. I've since joked with my parents that if he ever became famous, people would have referred to him as Michelle's husband. I met him twice after his election. The first time he was in full politician mode. The second time we talked. He was the same, but seemed irritated and exhausted. Yeah, I think running the United States might make you a little irritated and exhausted, just saying. Story 37. I know a couple of internet famous people. Think live streamers, influencers, etc. One I'm still very good friends with, but he refuses to acknowledge my existence whenever he's in his internet/professional persona. Like, I'll pop by his stream, say hi, and he'll just ignore it. I lived near an area that he would have to travel to at least once a year for his work, which is what made him internet famous, and I would never get invited to see him during one of his performances. So I've just taken to not engaging in his social media posts/live streams, etc., and force him to update me on his life through chat. The funny thing was, when I first met him, he was already semi-famous in the specific community, but I had no clue who he was, so maybe he likes it that I just treat him as a person rather than as his internet persona? IDK. Unfortunately, for 9 to 10 months of the year, he has to be his internet persona almost all the time, so I used to rarely get his normal self until that time period is over. I worked with another before he got internet famous. I thought we got along really well, even heavily fought for him to be offered a specific role that he wanted and wasn't under consideration for originally. Then the company effed up, laid him off, not targeting him specifically, just told to downsize the office by X amount, and I think they just chose people at random, it felt. Then realized their mistake and had him no contact, which he understandably got upset over and left to join an upcoming content creation group. Now he's extremely well known in specific circles and has ignored every message and birthday wish I sent since he got laid off. I stopped sending anything about 3 years ago because I got the vibes he was too good for me now. Makes me sad because we bonded so much over shared interests before he got famous. Story 38. Well, this guy was my best friend's older sister's boyfriend when I was about 14. We kind of became friends a few years later when I was about 20 after they broke up, only through the mutual connection as I had seen him when I was younger. He was a decent guy, hung out once or twice, and blazed in his car. We chatted online a lot as well. He was saying he's a rapper now, and a few months later, I end up going to a concert he was opening for. It was a Mercules concert. We had talked every other day before this, and he even brought the tickets to my house the day of the show and said see you later. I gave him a drawing with some encouraging words on the back. The concert went well. I could see him looking at me while rapping a bit, and then once it was over, it was like I didn't even exist. Did talk to me and ended up leaving me there even though he left alone and lived near me and said he would meet me there. I ended up staying so late at the club that Merc himself ended up talking to me and hooked me up with a ride home from one of the stage guys. I don't think he ever talked to me again really after that. Not sure why. Might have been because of the high heel boots I wore that made me a foot taller than him, but I'll never know for sure. Story 39. Sophie Turner, who played Sansa Stark in the embarrassingly bad Dark Phoenix. She was just as stuck up and cliquey as you'd expect, unfortunately. Mummy and Daddy paid for her part on GOT, which is kind of revealed in her subpar acting ability, and it really went to her head, thinking she got the part on ability alone. She's from money and never had to work a day in her life. As far as I know, she's only gotten worse. She puts on a nice act for the public, but if the cameras aren't out, she'll be pulling the "don't you know who I am" to get free stuff, jump cues, etc., and having a proper tantrum if people aren't paying her the right kind of attention. According to a mate, she threw a right proper wobbler when Dark Phoenix was panned because of her hokey acting and lack of ability. Just like a proper narc. Can't say that I'm upset that I don't see her anymore. So I'm obviously American, I live in the United States, and I just want anyone from the UK that might be listening to this to weigh in. What in the world is a right proper wobbler? Do you guys really say that in England? Like, what the heck? A right proper wobbler. In the US, we just call that a temper tantrum. Story 40. I went to the same college as Colin Kaepernick. I wasn't really a huge fan of jock-type mentalities, but he and his teammates always seemed really nice. I always saw them getting onto the bus after practice, and Colin was always super polite and friendly to our bus lady, who was a really sweet lady. She was the mom of one of my high school friends. The schedule was pretty routine, and every time I saw him, he was talking to the bus lady, catching up with her and being jovial. Super polite guy. It was hard to watch all the crap he got and still gets from people. He always struck me as a genuine gentleman who didn't deserve any of the hate he got. Anyone who talks smack about him in front of me, I stand up for him and remind him that he's not a celebrity. He's a human being, and the things he stood up for are real issues. And he did it regardless of how unpopular it made him and well before the movement today. While I didn't know him well, I let them know that he was a good guy and really sweet. Story 41. I knew Machine Gun Kelly, Colson Baker, in high school. We used to play basketball together and share cabs back home. He was actually completely different from his persona now. He was quiet and would always wear the same hoodie. I also remember he would always have headphones and would be listening to hip-hop, though he wasn't rapping back then. Colson sometimes wore a bandana around his head as well. We would tease him for it and ask him if he was planning on heading to a gang fight. I guess that became his trademark look when he first started getting big. Little did we know, he was just practicing for the fame. Last thing, there was an incident where we saw someone being bullied. I specifically remember Colson talking about how he hated bullies. He would also talk about arguments he was having with his dad at the time. Seems like those were two big topics in some of his early songs. Story 42. Answering this question is a double-edged sword because if I name the person, they'll be upset, and if I don't, Reddit will scream, "Pics or it didn't happen." So take from this what you will. The celebrity I know used to be a great friend and a caring young girl. You can tell she was destined for celebrity because she always hogged the spotlight. Not because she took it, but because people were just drawn to her. In her teens, she volunteered at pretty much every opportunity, especially cleaning up the parks. She loves nature. One day, as we were headed to our park to clean up, there was a movie crew filming. As we got closer to watch, a few people noticed us and asked us to join in with the crowd. Never did figure out what movie this was, and trying to find us in the crowd probably would have been impossible. It was this moment she caught the bug to become an actress and started earning and saving money to make her dream come true. I supported her the entire way. We had lost contact once she moved to New York to continue her acting studies. After she graduated, she came home for a bit, and she told me she was on her way to Los Angeles because she had a small role in her first movie. She'd write often, telling me what movie she was appearing in. It wasn't a star just yet, and if it seemed interesting, I'd go see it. Didn't have the heart to tell her I didn't see her in 2 of the movies. Cut out, I guess. She finally nailed her big role, co-starring against an acting legend. At the time, she was 23, and it was pretty impressive how fast she made it big. A few years later, and this is pretty much where we parted ways. She came home to visit, and whoever this girl was, wasn't my friend. I can't say she was a snob, because that's a cheap excuse. She was definitely different. Nice, but not in a genuine way. She wanted the attention, unlike before, as she expected it, rather than earned it as she did. These little things started to irk me, because she seemed so insincere about talking with us, like it was a chore for her to do. When I approached her and asked her why she was acting this way, her response was, quote, "I don't know what you mean." I said she had changed, and she pretty much dismissed me for it, though I can't blame her. This happens often, I'm told. It's a shame because in the next 10 years, not only did her star start to fade, she also became bitter. I was completely shocked to discover she had started smoking, and I'm probably denying to myself if she wasn't doing drugs as well. She's no longer a star, doesn't work in acting, and has a comfortable life now as she's married with 2 kids. She seems happier now, but I've never had the heart to reach out to her because I feel I would be intruding on something she's probably wanting to forget. As I grow older myself, I started hearing the stories coming out of Hollywood, how it can turn the most humble person into an a-hole. There are truths to those stories, I'm sure, and a person behind each one. It shouldn't cost human dignity to make the movies we enjoy, but that's just my opinion. Story 43. Answering for my mom here, as I've heard the story so many times, and it's interesting because the transformation into a fame is a positive one. My mom lived in Manhattan her whole life, deep in the artsy scene, so she ended up knowing some people that got famous. In the early 80s, Tony Bourdain was her neighbor, and she did not like him. He was, according to her, unemployed more often than not and making rent by dealing drugs. He partied at all hours of the night, so obviously that irritated her as his neighbor. But he stayed in her life for a while as her husband and his friends continued partying with him, doing drugs with him, buying drugs from him. She was always cool with dropping some acid or smoking weed, but I think she hated the constant drug abuse as he was at the center of it. She actually ended up divorcing her first husband over it. So I think it's a sore spot in her life and she can't really get past it. Of course, Bourdain eventually wrote Kitchen Confidential, where he partially admits who he was back then. His life, I think, is very much one of redemption, and I've been a huge fan of his, read his books and watched his shows, and was pretty upset when he died. My mom wasn't so upset. Story 44. I went to school with Steph Curry when I was really young. I was at a Monte Rosie school in 2nd and 3rd grade, and he was a year behind me, 1st and 2nd. This was in Charlotte, North Carolina in the mid-90s. A few of the Charlotte Hornets players had their kids there, so I knew Hersey Hawkins and Muggsy Bogues' kids. I don't remember much about Steph's personality. I was in 2nd/3rd grade, but would frequently play basketball with him at recess. He was always a great shooter from what I remember, and I know his dad was working with him even back then. I would later play against him twice in high school, and though he was good, nothing about him made me go, "This kid's going to the NBA." Obviously, I was wrong. He jammed one of my fingers on a pass to end the game, so that was my punishment for doubting him. The only thing I regret is not accepting his invitation to his birthday party at the Hyatt when I was in 2nd grade. That was stupid of me. Story 45. I grew up in town beside Taylor Swift, and we're the same age, so we've had a few interactions, even though she wouldn't know or remember me. Early on, all her songs were genuine. That song about Drew she wrote was real. She wasn't the most popular, but that could have been for multiple reasons, not because she was nerdy. Most people don't know her parents had money and were a big reason she made it into music. Some days she could be snobby and other days humble. Kind of odd, to be honest. Around age 17 or so, I was riding with my friend and he accidentally crashed into her. She was super nice despite having a bad day and him trying to hit on her. A few years later, I waited on her and her family once after she had become more famous. I found it odd a 19 to 20-year-old couldn't order her own food, but perhaps I caught her on a bad day or she was just not wanting to deal with the people. I can't imagine people going crazy over you everywhere you go. One thing that always stuck out to me was one of her album releases. I don't remember which album, but she had already made it big. She decided to celebrate the release at the local Walmart that was closest to her home growing up. To put it nicely, this Walmart was not in the nicest area and could use a facelift, but I'd throw that gesture into the humble bucket. Story 46. Eminem and Kid Rock. Everyone around my age had an Eminem story. Everyone around my brother's age, 10 years older, has a Kid Rock story. I never met either before them being famous. I met Eminem before he was really big, literally just in a grocery store one night. It was after work and he was cool. This was like 2000. This is after he moved to a gated subdivision in the area. A bunch of kids used to throw M&M wrappers on his yard, and before he moved, they would pull up in his driveway and ask the security guard if it was really Eminem's house. Stupid kid stuff. He was cool about all of it. A few years later, my wife took prom pictures in front of his house with some friends. He came out and waved and went back. Always cool with people. His daughter graduated from the same school and he was always there for events, but sometimes off to the side to avoid being a distraction. No one ever complained about him, really. He just was a good dad and a cool guy. Kid Rock was apparently a really cool dude who turned a-hole who settled back to cool guy. Note, I'm not rich. I married up. I recommend this to everyone. Story 47. I was friends with the actor Brad Renfro when I was in college living in LA. We actually met in community service. We both had been arrested for minor drug/alcohol offenses. We swept the streets of Hollywood Boulevard. It was absolutely disgusting. In the morning, we had to sign our name on a paper to ensure we got credit for showing up. There was a little white dude in front of me, and he signed Brad Renfro in awful handwriting. I recognized the name from the movie Sleepers and The Client. We were also on the same page. Since we were the same age and not prostitutes like many, we got matched up together. He was super down to earth, maybe too down to earth, very trusting to a fault. His nickname was Fro. He loved the band Slipknot and hip-hop in general. He had a strong Tennessee accent and had a band called Frodad. He even drove all the way to Westwood from Hollywood to pick me up one morning for community service, blasting Slipknot at 6:30 a.m. Not my kind of music, but he was really into it, and it was fun to see. He invited me over to his house on Melrose after work. It was a little bungalow off Melrose. We were smoking some pot and having beers when his girlfriend came home. She got very angry that Brad was drinking and smoking pot with a guy he met at community service. She then came back into the room holding a bunch of balloon ties she had found. She screamed that Brad was doing heroin again. Brad looked at me and said, "Tell her how we were just playing with the water balloons." We hadn't been. She said she was calling his publicist and I should go. Brad apologized to me and said he would straighten out his girl and get back to me. I went home. I never saw Brad Renfro again until I saw his picture on the cover of the LA Times getting arrested in Skid Row for buying heroin. He then died of a heroin overdose about 2 years later at the age of 25. R.I.P. Fro. Story 48. My grandma was in a sorority with Ruth Bader Ginsburg at Cornell. She was still known as Ruth Bader then. I don't have too much info, but Grandma had nothing but nice things to say about RBG. Shocker, right? As well as Martin, who also attended Cornell at the time. My grandma was a nerd and said Ruth was even more focused on school. She told stories of sorority parties and dances, convos about boys, etc. They stayed in touch for a while after school, but eventually disconnected. She said Ruth was focused and bright. Again, shocker. I think of my grandma every time I see or hear about RBG. It amazes me to think that my grandma, whom was born in 1932 and passed away in 2017, was classmates with RBG, who's still actively working, and in one of the most important roles in the country. God, we need her to stay healthy. To the OP, this made me think of my gram, the sweetest woman I've known, so thank you. I love you, Grandma, and I miss you every day. Story 49. This one is really sad. Tara Reid, the American Pie actress, not the Joe Biden accuser. I worked in a bar in LA and she didn't have very many friends and enjoyed live music, so she'd come in twice a week and became really good friends with the bar staff. She was so pretty and fresh-faced. We knew she was trying to become an actress, which I thought was going to be hard since she was so shy. She'd come in and have 1 or 2 drinks and just talk to us all night. We protected her from being hit on, and she became part of our little bar family. She'd come to our bowling night and softball games and barbecues, complete and total sweetheart. We were so happy for her when she got a movie called The Big Lebowski, which was filmed at the bowling alley we went to. We had no idea it was about to become one of the biggest modern classics of all time. She started coming in less, saying she was getting a lot of offers. Then American Pie happened. She came in during the filming with some of the cast, ordering drinks for everyone and not paying for them. Okay, we thought, she's showing off. We'll cover the bill for our little sister. Her behavior became more and more drunken and idiotic. She drifted away. I would see her on Melrose or at a well-known fancy bar, and she was a train wreck that we all know her to be. She was always really nice when we'd see her, but, well, you've all seen what it did to her. Now she's a plastic surgery mess, pushing 50 and doing Sharknado movies. She's a classic cautionary tale about stardom and small-town girls. She's been through rehabs and crisis management, but at the end of the day, she's a mess. Maybe someday we'll see her and she can just be our normal old friend Tara. Story 50. I have two friends who went to school with Nicholas Hoult, Tony from Gen 1 of Skins. When he was filming About a Boy with Hugh Grant at 13, he was going around school sulking because the school gave him a small part in the play. Because he didn't have time to play the lead role, because he was the lead role in a movie with Hugh Grant. Apparently he was entitled surrounding his fame, even though his first movie hadn't gone out yet. And apparently he was always quite rude and standoffish, just all of the time. Fast forward about 15 years, and one of these friends and I see him at a bar in Workingham, small British town, one of the most expensive villages to live in the UK too, and he's standing there looking happy as chips when he sees people look at him. He saw my friend and I looking at him and he waved at us. She goes and talks to him. I get too anxious meeting new people and felt stared at, so I just ordered us drinks. Then she comes back a few moments later, kind of irritated. He'd been asking if she wanted an autograph or photo with him. He clearly didn't recognize her, and she was like, he's the same entitled a-hole he was at school. LOL, she never was a fan. Story 51. Not quite the answer to the question, but my brother and I met Robin Williams when he was filming the movie Patch Adams. One of the people running the AC machine outside gave us a hint that Robin likes to avoid crowds and likely wouldn't be walking out of the front door where everybody was waiting, and looked over at the side door. My brother and I went over, and fearing that if he saw people near the door he would choose another exit, we hid in some bushes. About 10 minutes later he came out, and I was just so excited I jumped out of the bush and ran towards him as he was getting on a bicycle. He got off and with a huge smile said it was nice to meet us and asked how long we were hiding, waiting on him. He thought it was hilarious, shook our hands, and signed the copy of Mrs. Doubtfire I had brought. Asked what our favorite subjects in school were and what we liked to do for fun. Then the crowd in front of the building figured out he must have exited out the back, and about 30 people started heading our way, all excited that they found him. He then said he had to go as he wanted to avoid the crowd and attention, but thanked my brother and I by name for meeting him and talking with him. He gave me a high five and then hopped on the bike and rode off, waving back to us. He was such a nice guy, and it was an awesome experience. I showed that VHS to every friend that ever came over, but eventually over a few years the signature practically faded away. I was so bummed that I decided to write a letter to him. I figured nothing would come out of it, but wanted to anyways. I wrote that I'm sure he didn't remember me, but I was one of the two kids who jumped out of a bush to meet him filming Patch Adams. Biggest fan, blah blah blah, and how I was sad that the signature faded, but that it was okay because I got to meet him. A couple months later, I received a handwritten letter from him saying he remembered us. He also included a signed copy of Mrs. Doubtfire, as well as a signed headshot. I was over the moon. I was very sad and upset years later when he passed away. Story 52. My ex-wife's aunt and Holly Hunter were best friends since childhood, growing up together, and all the way through high school. They were both in drama classes in high school, and even both left the small town they grew up in and went to drama/acting classes together in college. Holly Hunter was scouted and given some big parts in movies at a young age. My ex-wife's aunt was not. Holly went from college to Hollywood and got bigger and better parts and became a well-known star. My ex-wife's aunt dropped her acting classes and went into a clerical college, got a degree, and moved back home and got a low-paying job working for the same business for 40 years. She's lived with her parents and taken care of them, never moved very far up in her career other than being a secretary for years, and never got married. Holly has to this day remained best friends with my ex-wife's aunt, and once or twice a year, she flies back into town and takes said aunt out on shopping trips, dinners, etc. Holly has flown this aunt to Hollywood to her home for vacations, taken her on other international vacations, paid for this aunt's Christmas for over 40 years now, bought her new cars, and paid for family expenses, like medical bills, the aunt cannot otherwise afford. This aunt's parents passed away a few years back, one after the other, and Holly paid for every expense. The aunt has always lived a low-key life, nothing ostentatious, worked her low-paying job at the same business, but apparently has never wanted for anything because anything she's ever needed, Holly Hunter has paid for. This has always been a huge secret in my ex-wife's family, that no one in the family really talks about, but it's always been known that Holly has helped this woman out her entire life, even with her retirement. Holly could have become a huge star and forgotten about this woman years ago, but both have remained best friends since they were small children, and are still best friends to this day. Story 53. Not me, but my cousin's story. It was around Halloween in Wisconsin at their biggest university. Foo Fighters were playing a show that night at the nearby stadium to where my cousin lived. My cousin and his roommate were in a band and practicing their songs when they hear their doorbell ring. Open the door and the Foo Fighters and Dave Grohl yelled at them, "Happy Halloween, mother effers!" No joke, Dave said they were walking by and headed to State Street, where a ton of bars are, and heard them jamming, so they hung out with my cousin and played some music, then they all went drinking. I am so jealous of my cousin Rob. Ha! Okay, that's probably got to be the coolest random thing to ever happen to a person. What in the world? I'm jealous too. Not just you, OP. That's awesome. Story 54. One of the bullies at my high school is in the NFL now. He was a giant jerk to everyone, a terrible teammate, sore loser/sore winner, dumber than a bag of hammers, and a giant wimp. But he grew to be 6'5", and sometime after high school, he decided to actually get in shape. Nowadays, he acts all super religious. One of the coaches was Mormon and got him into it when they were making up his rags to riches story after the draft. He really milked it, talking about how humble he is and crap. He's married with 2 kids, probably to the first girl to be able to stand him for more than 5 minutes. They met right when he started popping off in college, so she probably recognized he was about to get big. Just goes to show you can be a giant douche to everyone, be lazy, refuse to work with others, be stupid, and you can become a millionaire if you just happen to have the right genes. Oh, his name is Garrett Bowles, offensive tackle for the Broncos. Story 55. I saw Novak Djokovic at a grocery store in Belgrado yesterday. I told him how cool it was to meet him in person, but I didn't want to be a douche and bother him and ask him for photos or anything. He said, "Oh, like you're doing now?" I was taken aback. All I could say was, "Huh?" But he kept cutting me off and going, "Huh? Huh? Huh?" and closing his hand shut in front of my face. I walked away and continued with my shopping, and I heard him chuckle as I walked off. When I came to pay for my stuff up front, I saw him trying to walk out the doors with like 15 Milky Ways in his hands without paying. The girl at the counter was very nice about it and professional and was like, "Sir, you need to pay for those first." At first, he kept pretending to be tired and not hear her, but eventually turned back around and brought them to the counter. When she took one of the bars and started scanning it multiple times, he stopped her and told her to scan them each individually, quote, "to prevent any electrical interference," and then turned and winked at me. I don't even think that's a word. After she scanned each bar and put them in a bag and started to say the price, he kept interrupting her by yawning really loudly. Okay, so for those of you that don't know or haven't encountered this one before, this is just like a cut and paste gag that people apparently like to use on Reddit, where you just change the name of the supposed famous person that you met, and then you change the name of the item that they purchased. Not too long ago, matter of fact, on this channel, we read the exact same story, except this was someone that met Elton John out to eat one night, and he was trying to steal dinner rolls. So this isn't real. Novak Djokovic was not at a grocery store trying to steal Milky Ways. So just so that you know, so that you recognize the verbiage and jargon moving forward, this is a hoax, a prank, and not very funny either. Story 56. I went to school with Brianna Jungworth from 6th to 12th grade. I'm not sure if she counts as a celebrity, but she gave birth to Louis Tomlinson's son and is dating Brody Jenner, so why not tell this story? She was one of the nastiest people I've ever met. She was a relentless bully that would message kids horrible things, urging them to end themselves. She would pressure her minions to do the same, even having them pretend to be friends with her victims before doubling down. I'm convinced the self-unaliving of one of our classmates had something to do with her behavior. She basically seems to be doing nothing of substance now. She posts on Instagram all day. Her son seems to be doing okay, which is good. I hope she teaches him to be kind, but honestly doubt she will instill decent values in him. She seems the same as before, blatantly self-obsessed but unhappy, just with ample money from her baby daddy. Story 57. I lived across the road from Blake Shelton and his family when he was a little kid. I'm about 13 years older than him, so I never hung out with him, but I rode the bus to school with his older brother and sister. When I was in college, he helped me find bugs for an insect collection required for an entomology class I was taking. I was home for the weekend and the doorbell rang. I went and opened the door and it was Blake. He was about 6 years old. He didn't say a word, but held out his fist, opened it, and showed me the bugs he'd collected for me with a big grin on his face. I'd like to tell him that I almost lost my precious insect collection when I was walking to class carrying it to turn it in. A big gust of wind came along and blew it out of my hands, and it skittered and cartwheeled down the street. I thought it was doomed and almost cried while I was chasing it down the street. Fortunately, only a couple of bugs in my collection were damaged. With his sense of humor, I think he'd really get a kick out of that story. He really liked my dad because he kept our garage door unlocked so all the neighborhood kids could use his air compressor to inflate their bike and motorbike tires. When Blake was living in Nashville before he got famous, he'd come home to visit and he'd always stop by to see my dad and visit for a while. He seems like he's still the same sweet, funny, mischievous country boy that he was when he was young. Story 58. My mom went to elementary school, grade school/primary school, with Bill O'Reilly. Actually sat next to him, I believe. She would tell stories about how he was a loud, opinionated kid who, at an Irish Catholic school taught by nuns, was constantly getting himself in trouble. She wrote and published a book in 1997/1998, right when the O'Reilly Factor was picked up by Fox News. She went on as a guest for an interview, 5 minutes tops, because he remembered her when she reached out. So apparently, he made an entire career of being himself. I'm not a huge fan, except for one night where my friend and I turned F it, we'll do it live, into a drinking game. But apparently, he stayed in touch with a lot of classmates from St. Brigid's over the years. I can't ask any confirmation on these stories because my mom passed away 2 years ago. I don't agree with his politics or like him as a person, but Bill O'Reilly did come to my mother's wake. I was too upset to introduce myself, but he's pretty tall, I guess. Story 59. My mom went to school with Ryan Gosling and his sister. My mom was closer to the sister, but Ryan always had a star quality to him. In school, he was known as that drama club kid who seems like he'll always be acting, and his sister was like, "My brother's in Disney," which was kind of annoying, I guess, but hey, he went on to do great things, so my mom's happy for them. His dad was also with my grandpa when he passed. The Goslings are good crap. Forgot to mention, they also lived down the street from my mom, so they hung out. I think Ryan's younger, so he always seemed like the young kid trying to fit in, which is funny to think about Ryan Gosling trying to fit into my country crap town. I obviously wasn't born yet, so this is all hearsay from back then. Story 60. My father coached a Little League football team, and I helped out with trivial things like keeping the kids behind a certain point on the sideline to avoid penalties, keeping track of timeouts, etc. One night, I noticed the smallest kid on the team was on the bench in tears because my father wouldn't play him. He was also the youngest kid. He didn't see a lot of playing time because of his size and age, but I remember watching him at practice dusting everyone else on the field when doing running drills and gassers. Anyway, myself and my little sister, who was the team's water girl, convinced my dad to put him in for one play. I don't remember the position he was playing or what was even called. I just remember him running about 40 yards the wrong way in order to avoid about 7 tacklers, then ran up the sideline and again dusted everyone on the field, eventually reaching the end zone. I'm fairly certain my dad started him every game after that. He eventually played QB and was very Mike Vick-esque. His name is Rajon Rondo. Okay, so Rajon Rondo, for those that don't know, ended up having a nice, lengthy career in the NBA playing basketball. So to hear that he got his first supposed crack at competing in sports was as a quarterback in, Little League is kind of interesting. How did he end up on the hardwood and not the gridiron? Anyway, moving on. Story 61. My sister was on a couple episodes of Saved by the Bell, the new class. I got to be on set and eat lunch with the production and crap like that. I didn't really care about meeting the younger cast, but I really wanted to meet Dennis Haskins, Mr. Belding, and Dustin Diamond, Screech. Screech was a complete twat. The only thing he said was that he didn't like me filming him with my camera, which is fine, I guess, but whatever. Mr. Belding was effing awesome, though. He sat and talked to me for like an hour. He told me stories about working with the original cast and asked me if I wanted to sit in front of his principal's desk where Zach Morris sat. Just a really genuinely good dude. Story 62. Dunno if it'd really count, but my uncle was Jim Hutton, boyfriend slash husband of Freddie Mercury at the time of his death, wrote Mercury and Me. I was born after Freddie died, so I can't vouch for what he was like during the relationship, but he was one of the most loving people I've ever known. Sort of played the role of a second dad sometimes, since he'd pick me up from school and take me back to his house to play with his cats. To be honest, I didn't even realize he was semi-famous until after he died in 2010. He was that humble about it. I'd have so many questions for him if he was still alive today, and the Bohemian Rhapsody movie did him a little dirty. Story 63. My mum would go to this bar in Cork City, Ireland back in the day, and on Fridays they had open mic. She'd walk in, see this guy playing, and walk back out. He was always there pushing his shite music. It was Bono. I also used to hang around with a guy who turned into a semi-famous influencer here. He did funny videos mocking his girlfriend and female things. Absolute jerkhead when he was younger. Used to tease and get people in trouble for fun. His dad died when he was younger, and he pushes that narrative now as to why he gained confidence to perform and put himself out there. Sad that his dad died, but he beats it into the ground. I worked for a social media company in NYC, and they saw his videos, thought they were hilarious, and wanted me to contact him because I was the Irish person in the office. I messaged him and his management got back to me, talked about commission, and they sent a quote for a 30-second video that would have something to do with our company. 15,000 euros. No, sorry. Story 64. My parents actually knew Paul Marr, a children's book author, not famous internationally, I think, but very famous within Germany. Way before he became famous, and actually were friends with him and worked with him during the time he became famous. He was always a great guy, but they lost touch due to reasons unrelated to his fame. When I was little, I was even gifted some of his books with personalized autographs and small sketches in them. I don't really remember since this was when I was still really young. My mom lately met him again by coincidence and said he hasn't changed much at all. He's still humble and has a great sense of humor. Story 65. Molly Ringwald rode the school bus with me when I was in 4th and 5th grade in Citrus Heights, California. She's a year younger than me. We both went to a newly formed school in Sacramento that was the home of a pilot gifted education program, and was about a 45-minute ride each way. She and this girl named Melanie used to sing Tomorrow from Annie on the bus every day. She has a really good voice, performed at the Sacramento Jazz Fest with her pianist dad, but after about a week of it, we all wanted to bounce our lunchboxes off our head. After that, she went down to LA and started on Different Strokes. I remember being grossed out when I saw her take her top off in a movie years later. Ew, I didn't want to see her boobs. She's done well for herself, though. She's not a natural redhead, by the way. Natural mousy brown hair. One of our hometown bands made good. City Kid became Tesla. My girlfriends and I used to party with those guys after shows at the Oasis Ballroom. One of my friends dated the rhythm guitarist, Tommy. He and I had words once. He was a total a-hole, probably still is. I also have a close and personal story regarding Joseph D'Angelo, the Golden State Killer / East Area essayer, best saved for another thread. Story 66. I used to waitress at a very high-end restaurant in downtown Detroit, and Aretha Franklin would show up about once a month with her son. I loved her work and how she paved the way for women in POC in the music industry. Heck, I was so excited to even just see her. And now I know why you shouldn't meet your heroes. She treated everyone like they should be worshipping the ground she walked on. She always demanded the restaurant have wings on the table when she arrived. We didn't serve wings, so staff had to literally run and get them. She demanded a specific waitress serve her because her son had a crush on the girl. Even if B wasn't working, she had to come in or a fit was thrown. They needed a specific table. We had to rush families out or open the section if it was closed for the night. We got very little notice, and she, overall, just acted entitled. I was heartbroken. I've served Lawrence Fishburne, Kid Rock, Jeff Goldblum, Drew Barrymore, and all of the Red Wings, and they were so awesome and kind. Mr. Fishburne gives the best hugs, too. Those are some of my favorite memories. Story 67. I grew up with Billie Eilish and Phineas. We were both homeschooled, attended a lot of the same classes, and our moms were, and still are, very good friends. I've known Billie since I was 12 and she was 4. I'd say I saw her at least 3 times a week with various classes we did together from when I was between the ages of 2 and 10, and her brother Phineas was often there as well. Anyway, I was a very shy kid. Didn't talk to people much except family and good friends. Billie and Phineas always made fun of me for being quiet. I wouldn't go so far as to say it was bullying or anything close to that, but it did get annoying and I remember mildly disliking them because of that. I always looked up to Billy in a kind of little sister way, though. I moved to a different state when I was 10 and she was 12, 1 year before she released her first hit, Ocean Eyes. Hearing her on the radio for the first time was so cool, and she rose to fame pretty quickly after that. I met her for the first time since she became famous last year, in June 2019 at one of her concerts. She and her mom invited my mom and I to come, and we hung out backstage before the show. She has changed definitely for the better. She was so nice. We have a lot of the same interests now, and honestly feel we could be good friends if she weren't so famous now. She's a very genuine person now. She gets a lot of hate that I really don't think she deserves in the slightest. Story 68. My mom is close friends with the costume designer of Mighty Boosh and got my brother and sister extra roles in it. My brother is a young Howard in flashback scenes. My sister was standing in the background. So we all spent a few days on set. I don't remember much because I was like 5 and my dad recorded a lot of it. In the episode where Vince and Howard are crimping, there was a deleted scene of my brother and sister doing a crimp on the street, and Noelle Fielding and Julian Barrett sent my parents a video of them teaching the how to do the crimp. It was the a little twisty crimp. In set, Julian Barrett was really friendly and spent a lot of time with my dad because he was expecting twins, so kept asking Dad for advice. Noelle Fielding was cool, but apparently seemed a little arrogant, but my parents put it down to him being busy. Michael Fielding, Naboo in the show, was the best. My dad has a video of him playing lightsabers with 5-year-old me. My mom's friend has also told about some other celebs. Catherine Tate is an a-hole. Ricky Gervais is great and works really hard, so everyone can go home early. Jack Whitehall is very nice, but also quite introverted. Danielle Kaluuya is one of the nicest guys around. David Williams is great, but his sets are very chaotic. Okay, so I don't know who any of these people are from this story, so if I butchered anyone's names or pronunciations, you'll have to bear with me. I'm assuming that this is a UK thing. I have no idea what this is or who these people are, so apologies if I didn't narrate that to your expectations. Story 69. I met future Hall of Fame quarterback Steve Young in 1995, 2 weeks before he led the 49ers to their 5th Super Bowl win. My parents and I went to a coffee shop after church one morning. I was 6 years old, and I was decked out head to toe in 49ers clothes. The cashier, after seeing my fanboy outfit, pointed to a nearby table, where Steve was sitting with a San Jose Mercury news reporter. At the time, Steve Young had just taken Joe Montana's starting quarterback spot, and there was a good bit of tension between the two. The reporter was interviewing Steve about this tension for an article. Little 6-year-old me, knowing nothing of the feud between Steve Young and Joe Montana, asked Steve for an autograph. He asked the reporter for a sheet of paper from the reporter's notepad, and before Steve signed the autograph, I loudly proclaimed, "I have a picture of Joe Montana on my wall!" Steve smirked and asked me, "Are you going to hang this up with it?" I replied, "I don't know," and shrugged my shoulders. He smiled and said, "Well, give me a call if you do." The conversation was recorded verbatim, word by word in the newspaper the next day, and I still have the autograph, which reads, "To Matthew, my main man, Steve Young, 49ers. But wait, there's more. Fast forward 25 years to January 2020 at the NFC Championship game in Santa Clara. My buddy somehow managed to get literal front row seats in the end zone at Levi Stadium. I wore the same throwback Steve Young jersey I'd worn for 10 years to the game. During pregame, Steve Young and his wife walked by. I shouted to him and pointed to my jersey, just as a show of support. He stopped, looked at me, and offered to sign it. I have a large collection of autographs, and none of them came from anyone that stopped what they were doing and offered to sign. It's framed on my wall now, next to the one I got 25 years ago. TLDR, met Steve Young twice, almost exactly 25 years apart, and he's the nicest, most generous celebrity I've met. A genuinely good guy. Story 70. Rick Riordan was my middle school social studies teacher. This was back in the early 2000s, when he was still in the process of writing the Percy Jackson books. Actually, he just posted a pic of himself in our old classroom the other day on Facebook, and it looks exactly like I remember. Before he became super famous, he taught at my school and wrote an adult detective series about a guy named Trey Navarro, I think. And my mom had some of the books. When I opened it up and looked inside and saw all the swearing and adult themes, it blew my 11-year-old mind. I brought the book to him at school and told him that it had twisted my poor young mind, jokingly, so he grabbed it and wrote, "Dear Weasel, please untwist your mind." Rick, I think my mom still has the book somewhere. He was the best teacher ever. He dressed up as a samurai when we learned about ancient Japan, and waved a fake katana at the students who were late, lol. And for our final exam, he made us draw a map of Africa from memory, with correct latitude/longitude and correct geographical features, rivers, mountains, etc. I got an 84 on mine. He also used the teachers and many of the students in my grade as inspiration for the characters in his Percy Jackson books. So I personally know pretty much all of the characters in that book in real life, minus the main characters who weren't based on anyone in particular. Our grade was very small, only 70 to 80 people at the time, so everyone knew everything about everyone, lol. Actually, one of the characters is my ex-boyfriend. He was always super bitter that he was in the book and I wasn't, lol. One of the most amazing experiences of my life. I haven't seen him in maybe 10 plus years, but I remember him vividly. From what I could tell, he's still a wonderful man to this day. All of us former students have nothing but good memories and kind things to say about him. Story 71. Not that well known, I guess, but the band The Darkness are all from my hometown and all attended my high school. My auntie dated the drummer and said Justin, the lead singer, was always very strange. Later, after they had become famous, I worked in a restaurant and they would come in at 9 p.m. every Tuesday and order the same things. I remember it was cool at first, but eventually annoying because the restaurant closed at 9, so we would usually be clearing down by then. But they would come in at the last minute, and Justin has such bad OCD that if he couldn't sit at the same table or order the same things, it was uncomfortable for everyone. Can't speak to their personalities overall, just these experiences. I also attended the Liverpool Institute for Performing Arts that Paul McCartney and other celebrities would do master classes and sit in the canteen with students during lunch. Paul would hand everyone their certificates at graduation. He seemed like he was always trying to be a cool guy, down with the kids, in his suits with Converses, but he was a nice enough man. Obviously, I can't speak about him before his game, as I wasn't born. Story 72. Back in the old days, I dated a musician, who then got their big break and became instantly famous literally the week we got together. Thing is, they didn't change at all. They were always a rock star, even before anyone knew it, lol. If anything, it made them get more serious because this music thing was starting to pay off. Nowadays, they're known and respected, but not experiencing current fame. Still totally the same. And my best friend from school became a Broadway star and also didn't change. Again, they always knew they would be one, even as a young teen. And again, it was all about the serious work of it. Another friend of mine was a movie star for a hot minute, but I knew them after. People still recognized them and quoted them and so on all the time though, because they were in a cult classic. But they had no interest in showbiz anymore. Very down to earth. They claimed fame did change them too much and they never wanted to be that person again. People who get famous as a result of a lot of hard work and a love for their craft tend to not change so much. Those that accidentally become famous or are pursuing fame rather than the work itself tend to be insufferable twits. But in my line of work, I've worked with a ton of both kinds. The difference is astounding. Story 73. Went to high school with Amber Heard. At lunchtime, the boys would take over a few tables and the girls would take over a few tables. Amber wouldn't just sit with the girls, but she'd sit with the boys a fair amount. She was very pretty, but didn't wield that power to become popular. She was liked by both the girls and the boys and didn't care if you were popular or not. She'd be friends with you regardless. She had an artistic mind, even back then, and saw things differently than most. She was very passionate about her interests and beliefs too, but would want to understand yours. She began exploring her sexuality around sophomore year and expressed that she was interested in girls, which, as a high school boy, intrigued most of us. Our principal did not like that, as it was a Catholic high school, and she was asked to leave. I distinctly recall one day at lunch she told us she was going to move to Hollywood and become a famous actress. We all scoffed at that remark saying, "Yeah right, good luck." She didn't come back to high school the next year, junior year. We lost touch, but one day at a Barnes & Noble, I saw her on the cover of a magazine. Forgot which, maybe Maxim, back around 2004 or 2005. Quietly said, "Wow, she made it. Good for her." Saw her at a party maybe 2 years later. She was telling us how she moved to New York to model and then to LA. Said things were going well, but it seemed like it was all going to her head. She had either brought her GF or found one at the party and made out with her often. Enough to where the rest of us were like, okay, this is weird. Like she was trying to prove a point. I haven't even talked to her since, but when she made the news for dating and then marrying Johnny Depp, I thought that relationship might work because they both seem to share that artistic quality and endearing weirdness about them. I wasn't shocked to find out she was manipulating the breakup, but was disappointed she made it so far and threw it all away. I feel badly for Johnny Depp and anyone else hurt along the way, because that wasn't the Amber we all knew. I hope she finds inner peace and can find that chill era in her mind before she launched, where she was liked by everyone, except the principal. Story 74. I'm probably too late to this, but I grew up with Justin Bieber. He was known around town for being a bit of a little crap. Was known for getting into fights, talking back to teachers, and I don't know if this is true, but there are rumors that he was stealing stuff from stores. On Friday nights in our small town, it was pretty common to go support the local hockey team. One time, we were both at the game. He had those shoes with wheels in the heels. We called them heelies or wheelies, and he rolled up to me and stomped on my foot with the wheel, for no reason. I will unfortunately always remember that about him because it was so unwarranted and mean. We were also friends on Facebook for a while when he was becoming really popular. His Facebook name was Just in Time. He posted a bunch of pictures of the car that Usher bought him for his birthday, and he had a bunch of Apple photo booth pics with other kid celebrities. Eventually, I guess his PR people made him delete Facebook. I started to feel really bad for him the more famous he got. He didn't have the easiest childhood from what I understand, regardless of the small, dumb things he used to do. It must have been really difficult becoming an overnight sensation like that. Story 75. Not before they were famous, but on the rise. My dad happened to run into Robin Williams a few times in his life. The first was when my dad worked for NYC Water. Robin Williams was just coming off Mork and Mindy, so he was still known, but not the huge star he's now recognized as. They were filming Moscow on the Hudson, and production rented a local deli my dad normally got lunch from for the day, and my dad realized and tried to ask for an autograph. Robin didn't want to make a fuss or draw attention, so instead he just invited my dad to sit and have lunch with him. They had a casual convo over sandwiches while Robin was still in costume. A few years later, my parents were at a taping of SNL and someone tapped my mother on the shoulder because her 80s hair was too fluffy for him to see over. It was Robin, and my dad turned and he apparently recognized him and said, "Hey, and sorry." He was hosting in a few weeks and wanted to get a feel for the stage from the audience. No matter what, he was kind, personable, and all around exactly what everyone loved him for from afar. So this is now the second testimony that we have that is pro Robin Williams. Is that enough to confirm that he was actually a great guy? I don't know. I think so. Yeah. Let's give him a gold star. Rest in peace, Robin. Story 76. Don't know if this counts as he's just a football head coach, but I was friends with Kyle Shanahan, who's the coach of the San Francisco 49ers. I remember his family moved in down the road from us, and he and I became buddies when we were 13 or so. Going to their house was awesome, as his dad was a coach for the Denver Broncos and 49ers, and they had so much amazing sports memorabilia around the house. On the walls were jerseys from Barry Sanders, Jerry Rice, Steve Young, John Elway, etc. It was like a dream for a 13-year-old sports fan. Kyle would tell me how he would go to training camp and play catch with these 49ers, and had to do the menial jobs like cleaning and bringing water to them during practice. Kyle was a normal, nice kid, a bit competitive, but it makes sense considering his success now. His parents were super kind and welcoming. It was a warm household. They had a lot of crystal clear Pepsi, which apparently you could only get in Colorado and not California, and seeing the clear can blew my mind. One funny little story was when I was going to stay the night and I had to call my mom to let her know. I went to the phone and was about to dial when I saw the name John on speed dial. I knew that the Shanahans were friends with John Elway and his family, so I pressed speed dial. A deep voice answered, which I swear was John Elway, and I laughed and hung up. To this day, I tell people that I had a phone call with John Elway once. Anyway, that's the one I got. Nice trip down memory lane thinking about it. Yeah, because John is such a rare name. I mean, I'm sure it had to have been John Elway, right? Sorry, I know he was joking. I'm joking too, in case you didn't pick up on the sarcasm. But yeah, good story. Story 77. I know a guy who became a rock star. He went through a phase where he liked the smell of his own farts a little too much and started to become detached from reality. Luckily, something smacked him back down to earth with the rest of us. He's a nice guy again after a rough patch. He's a weird guy, but that's nothing new. Also grew up with a guy who would have a very good career in Major League Baseball. He hasn't changed at all. Married his childhood sweetheart, still mows his own grass, good father, etc. It's just like he lucked into a great job. The rock star had so much natural talent, it was no surprise he became famous. The baseball player, however, wasn't even the best player on his team in high school. He had some great coaches in college and minor leagues and worked hard to become one of the best pitchers in the world until getting injured. Story 78. My mom dated Steve Kerr in college. She doesn't follow basketball whatsoever, didn't particularly care he was an athlete, but he had pursued her, so she dated him, as she tells it. They broke up because, and these are her words, quote, his effing crazy ex wouldn't leave us alone. She'd track me down on campus to chew me out and tell me I wasn't good enough for him. She'd figure out his daily walk between classes so she could see him and say something every time we were walking together. She never talked to me when I was with him, just gave me dirty looks. So he didn't really believe me about how she was acting. I said, F this, you two can have each other, it's not worth it. That girl ended up marrying him. She didn't even realize he was famous until we were watching the GSW finals one year, and her head snapped around at the mention of his name. Then told me later when my dad wasn't around. My dad went to ASU, rival to her/Steve Kerr's University of Arizona, and she's convinced it would make him feel inferior or something, lol. Story 79. So distantly related to Andy Warhola, from the old country. I never met him, but family grew up with him. My great-aunts, uncles, and grandmother would tell me about him. My great-grandfather got his job at the mill or mine and side work during construction. Apparently, his parent or parents lived in one of great-grandfather's rentals for a bit when they came over. My great-aunt Judy was the same age, and they attended school all the way until high school at Shinley in Pittsburgh. They were also very active in church together. She was always sick as a kid, they said. He was known as shy and weird. He was smart, but would spend so much time drawing in class and would get in trouble for it. My family says he was awkward and eccentric, but when he became famous, he was more talkative, as only started breaking out of his shell in college. My great-uncle Steve joined him at Carnegie Tech, now CMU, for college. My great-uncle flunked out his first semester from going to wild parties with him, as he said Andy knew the most beautiful women on campus. But no worries, Steve went back to graduate the next year and ended up working for NASA. For the most part, my family loved and adored him. There were a few times he was almost neurotic towards others when they would visit him in NYC, but for the most part, he always treated them like family. He even showed up to a few family reunions until his death. Also, the gallbladder problems that killed him still runs in our family. Almost all of my mother's side, relations to him, ended up with the problem, though it tended to be more female than males with the issue. So apparently the only thing that changed was him being able to express himself more and being more talkative. Story 80. I used to know Ali Wong. I helped run a violence prevention org, and we would fly her out for our multimedia festival for several years. She's always been a supporter of helping girls and women. Because we were very grassroots, she'd sleep on sofas of volunteers' apartments. I drive her back and forth to her comedy events. She was just as raunchy in her stand-up as she is now. She's the most down-to-earth person and super nice. Also does not drink any alcohol. My husband thinks she's this angry Asian lady yelling at people, but of course, she's not like that in real life. I remember her Netflix stand-up when she mentioned she makes her husband lunch every day. She's a nurturing person. I'm so glad she got famous. Now, of course, I can't go see her shows because they're pricey AF, but damn, it was fun seeing her for free many times in small art galleries and auditoriums. Story 81. Sweet, I can bust out my Jason Priestley story. Went to high school in North Vancouver in the late 80s. Jason Priestley attended the same school, Argyle High School, and was a year ahead of me. At the time, he was somewhat known for being an actor on the Airwolf TV show. Super nice guy, and he was a big fan of our senior basketball team, which I was on. He showed up for a lot of the games and was a very vocal supporter. Anyways, our school had a bit of a rivalry with another North Shore school, the Windsor Dukes. They had one of those big foam head mascot things, the Windsor Duke. Big bearded mascot in medieval clothes with a foam sword. We were playing a tight back and forth game in our gym, and the Duke was doing his usual capering around thing. Mr. Priestley apparently took offense to this. We were in a timeout, and I remember because I was sitting on the bench opposite the mascot and had a really good view. Jason Priestley snuck down out of the bleachers and sprinted along the sidelines, dropping his shoulder and nailing the Duke in one of the most textbook full extension tackles I've ever seen. He ends up astride the prone mascot and starts raining down 1-2 punches on the big foam head. This goes on for a few seconds until he punches out one of the wire mesh eyes that the mascot suit wearer would see through, and he gets a good look at the wearer, an absolutely terrified young girl. He abruptly stopped his assault with a look of horror on his face, picked her up, dusted off the suit, and ran back up to the bleachers. Kicker is, the mascot suit was being worn by the girlfriend of one of the players on our team. Priestley later doubled down on this by bringing a mannequin dressed in a Windsor Dukes basketball uniform and smashing it on the sidelines in Windsor's gym. He was ejected from the gym for that one. Nice guy otherwise. Hard partier in high school. Somewhat unfortunately, he signed my annual Drink and Drive, Kill Your Kids, Jason Priestley. Story 82. Tom Brady. I knew him in high school, and I was one of his best friends. On the football team, he didn't perform that well and wasn't amazing, but I never told him that. When he graduated, he went to Michigan, and after that, he got drafted. I would hang out with him most days. I'd pick him up from the airport to go to dinner or something. That slowly began to change when he had a whole escort in SUVs, people following him everywhere. I still have him in my texts, but I've lost that connection we had. I've been invited to his place in Yellowstone once, but he had a lot of people over and I didn't get to talk much to him. I live in the Bay Area and support the Niners now. And Tom didn't change a lot. He's still a humble guy. I'll never forget Sierra High School and when I thought he would never make it. Story 83. Because he's my uncle, I won't say who it is, but huge voice actor / director / animator / producer for Disney first, then DreamWorks. Before his first huge movie by himself, he was pretty cool. Really kind of distant from the family, but when he did see us, he'd draw all the kids' pictures and talk about his movies and life. After a few more movies, he changed a lot. Was really sad my grandpa really missed him towards the end. We would be over there every day caring for him while his son flew out once for a day. He estranged himself from my grandpa for no good reason and wouldn't reconcile. You could tell when he was at my grandpa's funeral and wrote his speech right before and didn't give a crap about his own dad. My grandpa was the most upstanding man ever. Everything he did was for others. He was kind and generous. Broke my heart that this jerk was his son. Story 84. I went to school with Grace Vanderwall, who won America's Got Talent and has a Disney show. She was a bit odd and kind of quiet before she got famous, and I was somewhat friendly with her. Now I haven't talked to her since, but I've heard mixed things about her, mostly negative, from people I know who still talk to her occasionally. I'm not going to say any of this actually has anything to do with her character, as I personally haven't talked to her, and there may be quite a deal of jealousy, but nonetheless, the claims are universal, minus like 2 people, so who knows. But beforehand, she was nice and had a particular sense of humor, and was like the stereotypical quirky girl. This has been played up, and of course, after she became famous, per se, everyone in the grade wished to metaphorically suck her chicken, pardon my French, but what do you expect from middle schoolers? It isn't as exciting as many of these other comments, but yeah, that's my take. Quiet, unpopular, and fairly ostracized girl becomes fawned over by popular kids, and frankly everyone. Apparently snubbed everyone off for the most part, and bad blood persists. Seems almost predictable, to be honest, now that I read it over. Story 85. I guess I only knew them from the height of their fame, but grew up in the same town as both Britney Spears and Jamie Lynn Spears, and went to the same high school as them, the same time Jamie Lynn was there. She was filming her Nickelodeon show at the time, I believe, and I only saw her at the school a handful of times. Once at a very bizarre book signing / autograph thing at our Scholastic Book Fair. She seemed very aloof and indifferent towards everyone, and didn't really interact with anyone at our school. Even then, she was only a fraction of how aloof Britney seemed the one time I met her. Anyway, Jamie Lynn got pregnant, which resulted in her getting expelled because the school was a grossly conservative private school, and her getting pregnant at that age kinda ended her career. So I think around 2011 to 2013, I ran into her at the town Walmart, and I had a pleasant conversation with her, and she seemed much happier and down to earth. Sometime last year, she had an event in the town that my mom went to. Britney still seems a little wild, though. I heard she recently claimed to be the fastest person on Earth or something? Story 86. I met Jack White about a month or 6 weeks before the White Stripes became near world famous. He was super polite and quietly spoken. I then put on a show by the band in my town, and then a few days later, they were in every newspaper and magazine. During the following couple of years, whenever Jack and Meg were in town and I had a show on, they'd turn up, never emailing in advance to be on the guest list or anything, as so many others did, usually via their manager or agent. They just hand their money to the person on the door, heads down, no special treatment wanted. One time it was my friend's daughter's birthday, and he told Meg that his daughter was a fan, so she took his phone and wished her a happy birthday. Super sweet and nice. I've not had any contact with them since about 2005 now, though. Story 87. Jonathan Taylor Thomas was my neighbor in the early 90s, before Home Improvement, up until production of The Lion King really ramped up and he moved away. I don't really remember much about him, as I was only 7 or 8, except that he was very polite to my parents and was always too busy to ride bikes with us. I threw a rock at him because he wouldn't hang out once. That got me grounded, and at some point he returned our mail key that I had lost. It had a Donald Duck dongle on it, and I remember him talking enthusiastically about Disney with my parents when he returned it. Most of the time we hung out. He was doing something related to acting, while I played with his wrestling toys in the garage or sat quietly waiting somewhere in a different room. I got to hear him practicing Can't Wait to Be King with his voice coach while I was waiting for him in the kitchen with his mom. Nice kid, but now that I think about it, he probably didn't really like me much. Story 88. I went to high school with John Watts, director of the Marvel Spider-Man movies. We were both in drama club and had a few classes together, so I'd say I was an acquaintance. He was a dramatic person, but not in a bad way, and had a bit of an ego on him. He was also one of those artsy film types, you know the kind. Like, his senior photo was black and white, while he looked to the side in shadow. Everyone else's was in color. That type. Really funny, like ridiculously funny. I wouldn't have been surprised if he decided to become a comedian, but even back then, he wanted to work in the film industry. It was well known among the drama geeks. He was a friendly dude, too, and was full of ideas. I have a lot of stories about him since I interacted with him a lot, and lots of pictures because I thought I was a photographer back then and always had my camera, though I don't think he'd remember me. He seems a lot more humble now, which I guess comes with age. In interviews, he seems so serious, which is shocking. Story 89. My cousin is Morgan Spurlock. Supersize me. I was really young when I went to my first family reunion. Huge Irish family. This was right around the time that documentary had taken off and McDonald's was facing a lot of heat to change how they make their food. Apparently, he used to be a super sweet, family-style guy, but according to a bunch of the family I talked to while at the reunion, he basically got a deal to have his own show, and once that happened, he flipped the script and was now a huge douche who had little to do with anyone who wasn't his immediate family, and acted like a superstar with the paparazzi, even though he would barely be considered a B-list celebrity at the time. It was weird as hell having to watch that documentary in school when we were doing a period on eating healthily, and the whole time I'm just like, that's my cousin being disgusting on this huge projector in my gym. Story 90. This might get buried, but I went to high school with quite a few people playing in the NHL when they were on the Spitfires on the OHL. I met people like Taylor Hall, Ryan Ellis, and Austin Watson, and also played football against Luke Wilson of the Seahawks/Lions. Most people knew about Taylor Hall, and he was pretty much famous in the OHL even before being the #1 overall pick. However, he was a straight a-hole, was always a disturbance in class, would skip frequently, and when you would ask him anything, he was dumb as mud or super snobby. Not sure what he's like nowadays. Had one class with him where I was stuck working on an assignment with him because we happened to get selected out of a hat, and I 100% did all the work, and teacher felt pity on me, so it was easy on my grading. Austin Watson was super cool, extremely friendly, good sense of humor, and was always friends with everybody and tried his hardest, and showed up when the team wasn't on the road. Ryan Ellis I didn't have any classes with, but would frequently see in the halls at lunch/between classes. He seemed okay, a little snobby, but didn't walk around like he was hot crap. Luke Wilson I had a few interactions with, but he was always really nice and friendly when our school would play against Villanova. My cousin would know more as he actually played football with him for 4 years in high school, but I've heard nothing but good things. Story 91. I met Ed Robertson, lead singer of Bare Naked Ladies. My cousin and I were around 13 years old and walking around Fair Oaks Mall in Northern Virginia with my grandmother. She and I had just gone to Cinnabon and were eating our food while walking when he walked out of Banana Republic. My cousin put her hand on my shoulder to stop me from walking and told me who it was. At the time, I didn't know the band or their music very well, to be honest. She, on the other hand, was a huge fan. So, with a wad of cinnamon roll in my mouth and about 3/4 cups of icing on my hand from said cinnamon roll, I walked up to him and asked if he was the singer for B&L. He laughed and said he was and then shook our hands, even though they were sticky. He led us into Banana Republic and asked the woman for 2 empty bags so he could sign them for us. And he did. Real stand-up guy. offered us tickets for the show they were doing at George Mason University that evening, but we were leaving for Chincoteague Beach with family, so we politely declined. Long story short, her friend went to that concert and they were famous for doing an ad-lib sort of song at each of their shows. That night, he did an on-the-spot song about the girl with a sticky bun, and to this day, I wish cell phone/cell cameras were a thing back then. I'll be 38 in December. Incredibly nice guy. I became a fan immediately after that day. Spent about 20 to 30 minutes talking to him. Incredibly humble and welcoming man. The mall was extremely empty that day because it was around 11 a.m. and storming pretty heavily outside. He said we were the only ones who knew who he was. Story 92. Met Walter Gretzky, Wayne Gretzky's father, in 2004 at a signing in a grocery store. My mom and I drove 20 minutes to meet him in a nearby town. When we told him we drove from the next town over, he could not believe it. "You drove all this way to see me? Stay for a while and talk," he told us. He let us stick around to when the signing was over to chat for a bit. I was a huge Wayne Gretzky fan at the time, 10-year-old kid, and I had written a letter and attached a hockey card I wanted to give to Wayne to potentially sign. Walter said he would, but his manager he was with intervened and grabbed the letter, assuring me Wayne would get it. I never got the letter back, lol. Walter Gretzky, very nice and humble man. His manager, kind of a douche. Can't blame him though. I'm sure everyone wanted a piece of Wayne some way or another. But, if he wasn't gonna give him the letter, he could have just said so, to be honest. Story 93. Anyone a fan of the band The Internet? Steve Lacey, the main dude, went to my school, GWPHS in Inglewood. We had jazz band together, and also honors history. He transferred from another school, and the first thing everyone noticed was that he was hardly ever at school. We befriended each other in jazz band, and he learned that we had history together, and he copied my notes sometimes, but he was never too interested in doing schoolwork. He was extremely chill, laid back, and a funny guy. He would take his shoes off in jazz band, and pretty soon we all did the same. He made us feel comfortable, and we loved him. He recently beat the Washington curse, too. Those of us that knew him wish he would talk to us again. When he started composing for Kendrick Lamar, he stopped getting in touch or talking to anyone and made new friends. Of course, that's normal, but we miss him. I damn sure do. Nonetheless, it's so nice to know he's happy in life and has done so well for himself. We love and support him. Story 94. This will probably get washed away in a sea of comments, but I'll still tell it. Back in the 80s/early 90s, apparently Christopher Lloyd's half-brother attended our church growing up, and from what I heard of him, I was very little back then, he was very much a person who loved participating in church events. He unfortunately passed away in the early 90s, and his funeral was arranged at our church. My mother was a church director, so she attended the funeral with my sister at the time. Christopher did attend the funeral, but as my mother recounts it, he sat in the back towards the entrance to not distract the funeral/eulogy, as he was still extremely famous at the time, coming off of the recent Back to the Future movies, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, The Addams Family, etc., and had people coming up to him. He wanted to honor his brother and not distract the funeral, so I was told. My mom said he was very grief-stricken, eyes red with tears during the funeral. Afterwards, my sister met him at the wake and said he was the tallest man she had ever seen in her life, but she was only about 7 years old, so I guess he would be to her. As she said to me, quote, "Mom asked me to come over and introduce me, saying, 'This is Mr. Lloyd,' and he said to her, 'Hello, young lady, how do you do?' And she said, 'Hello,' like a little kid does, and ran off to play. That's all I can tell of this recounting. I don't really remember his brother too much. I was too little to even know him and didn't attend the funeral. Story 95. Aaron Rodgers' dad was my family chiropractor. He, his dad, Dr. Ed, is an absolute sweetheart, and the dad from Juneau always reminded me of him. Gave us a discount because my sister worked at a coffee shop across the street. I still instinctively refer to Aaron as Little Aaron Rodgers, and picture him as the snotty kid doing his homework by his dad's fish tanks in the waiting room. He was always basically one of those kids who felt he was better than everyone else, and had everything handed to him. His parents paid his way through community college, rent and everything, making sure he could focus on his dream of playing football. But it didn't surprise me when I read that he cut his family off. It made me sad, but it didn't surprise me at all. They were wealthy enough on their own that they didn't exactly need his money or anything, but they were always just really proud of their kid. Yet they have to pay to go see him play, and he returns their Christmas presents every year. That's the Little Aaron Rodgers I knew. Story 96. A popular Instagram model in my country is a close friend of my cousin. I think I met her when she was 13 or something. Since I hang out at my relative's house often, I saw this perfectly normal and plain girl till she got to 18, and she was still perfectly plain and normal, as 5 out of 10 as any person could be. Neither ugly nor pretty, but her weight was definitely in the healthy range. One fine day, my colleagues were ogling pics of a pretty Instagram model. I took a look and was flabbergasted to see it was my cousin's friend. She was dressed far more proactively, with tons of makeup, contorting her waist in an anime-like fashion, then do one of those duck faces thing. She had over 100K followers, too. All I can say is, what the F? Because everyone was seeing her as this ultra hot and pretty model, but under all that posing and makeup, I know her as a completely normal person. I didn't ruin my colleague's fantasy if you're curious, but it does leave me to wonder what those Instagram models I ogled truly look like in real life. Story 97. One of my uncles knew Mark William Calloway on a personal level before he got into wrestling. He used to say he was always a kind person and they used to hang out regularly. After getting into wrestling, he used to get free passes to watch the wrestling matches and merchandise and still was actively in contact. However, things slowly started to change and Mark became distant. He started being reclusive and made his house dark and lighting them with candles. Mark also kept going on about demons and wore dark clothing, hat and gloves, sometimes even purple. My uncle said he used to lift his hand up and drop them and expected all the lights to go out. At first, my uncle thought it was a running joke as part of his wrestling act, but then saw Mark actually being serious when he walked around in his wrestling costume every day. This all started to happen in 1998 when The Undertaker threw Mankind off Hell in a Cell and plummeted 16 feet through an announcer's table. So I've actually kept up with The Undertaker / Mark Calloway since he retired. He's got a really cool podcast, but he even admitted, when he was doing the whole dead man persona thing, he basically had to stay in character all the time because, he couldn't just be out, wearing a t-shirt and shorts and having a beer at the bar and then turn around and, do the whole rest in peace and, the lighting and smoke and all of that. So he said one of the biggest reliefs he's had since retiring is being able to just be a normal person again. Just be Mark. You're not The Undertaker, you're not the dead man, and that's just liberating. So that's actually a funny story to read. Story 98. Kind of late to the party, and will likely dox myself doing this, but my parents are good friends with Kyle Mooney's parents. I went to school with the guy, but he's a few years younger than me. Honestly, I don't know him that well, but my parents love to rant and rave how great he is, and they like to point out his successes. I've got the typical boomer parents that like to compare their friends' kids to their own kids and make it a weird competition. Anyways, apparently he hasn't changed much other than getting better with his comedy. I say kudos to him for being good at his craft and hope he continues to stay humble, but if I hear one more time how great Kyle Mooney is from my parents, I might go off on them. My brothers and I have a running joke and call it the Kyle Mooney effect. Oh, hey, do you know Kyle Mooney? Used to play soccer with him. He also went to the same high school as you. Well, his dad told me. And then some ridiculous line after that. Story 99. I went to an international school, so a lot of my friends are children of celebrities. Some now celebrities themselves, or super rich, investment bankers and the likes. The vast majority are nice people, humble and just regular human beings. On the streets, they'll sometimes try to hide their status to just enjoy their life normally, but around their school friends or community, they're just normal people. They don't really change who they are before or after they become celebrities. There are some interesting patterns though. 1. Celebrity kids are often the ones who are more bratty or entitled than people who become famous in the first place, but this is also pretty rare. 2. Celebrity kids will often date other celebrity kids, but I think this is just because they relate to each other more and not a status/entitlement thing. 3. Celebrities who are famous for the same type of thing often have very similar personalities. I know 2 self-made Instagram influencers who are in different niches, but they both have really bubbly, outgoing personalities. I know 2 kids from different families of actors who are now becoming actors. The older one is huge now. They're both cool, calm, and collected, very chill guys. Also very athletic people. And 4, most kids follow in their parents' footsteps, unless they really don't want to. Children of actors become actors. A child of a TV personality is now a musician. Children of politicians become politicians. Children of athletes become athletes, etc. Story 100. I went to school with Michael Phelps. In elementary school, he was picked on all the time. He was tall, gangly, and had huge ears, and no one let him forget it. He used to try to be mean back, but it was always a pathetic display. At the time, I mostly knew him by reputation because he was a year or two older than me, but everyone knew him as that weird swimmer kid. His mom worked for the school system, and he would complain to her about the people and teachers he really didn't like, and they'd always wind up in trouble. That used to make me so mad because I was picked on mercilessly, but nobody did crap about it. I went to a different middle school than all my classmates, but came back for high school, and Michael was there. This was, I think, 2 summers after his first Olympics, and he was America's sweetheart. He was, to this day, one of the biggest pricks I've ever met. He had a reputation for being crappy with girls at parties. Our school had a big special ed program because nobody effed with the disabled kids, except for Mikey Boy. He'd never try to tangle with someone who could fight back, but he'd rough up mentally challenged kids in the hallways. His reputation around town post-high school, he still lives here, is about as good as it was then. Mostly a drunk a-hole. Story 101. Marshmallow used to be a pretty chill, fun guy back in college and early on in DJing. Kinda turned into a jerk and just about stopped talking to his old DJ buddies when he started getting noticed. Gave no credit to everyone who helped him and DJ'd with. Just kinda ditched everyone and rode his popularity wave as hard as he could. Obviously don't blame him for loving money and grabbing onto his shot, but being a jerk and basically pretending he didn't know anyone from pre-fame days was pretty lame. Just spiraled further down that path as he changed from his signature DJ style to more mainstream. Used to really like the guy, but he's basically the poster boy for getting rich and famous by selling out, and thus he's too good for his not rich friends from his past. Story 102. I haven't personally met Mariska Hargitay, but my mom's friend was her female dog on set for a while, and one story he told me about her always makes me chuckle when I think of it. She liked for her trailer to be inundated with candles, tea lights, whatever they could find on set for her. It was put in her trailer. She wanted them blown out before she left and lit before she came back. One day, she stepped out for a call. My mom's friend was on the clock for her and didn't realize he needed to relight the candles before they wrapped for the day. He went out to grab her coffee before the day was through, came back to a fuming Mariska. She was absolutely blue in the face because her candles weren't lit. He haphazardly set the coffee cup down on a table inside and went to go light the candles. She followed him and ended up knocking the coffee all over herself. Edit. To answer the question on this thread, he said she was always very full of herself on set. Not a very nice person to be around. I would think she's mellowed out a bunch now, but I haven't seen too many interviews post-SVU. Story 103. My mom dated Dan Aykroyd, Ghostbusters, right when the movie came out, so he was relatively famous. The story goes they met on Martha's Vineyard, and my mom used to hang out at a nude beach there frequently with her friends. She needed a ride, and Dan Aykroyd drove by with his car, so he let my mom and her friend get a lift. Apparently he had a house there, so while he and my mom dated, she got to see the house. From what I know, there was a party at the house, and my mom got to meet the parents, and also James Taylor. My mom says he was nice and sweet, and as far as we can tell from the other side of the screen, he still is. Story 104. I saw Ryan Gosling at a grocery store in Los Angeles a couple years ago. I told him how cool it was to meet him in person, but I didn't want to be a douche and bother him and ask him for photos or anything. He said, "Oh, like you're doing now?" Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and cut this off because this is the exact same cut and paste post that I admonished you guys about before. Now here we are doing it again. Now we just have Ryan Gosling instead of Novak Djokovic. It isn't funny. Guys, please stop doing this. Story 105. My mom grew up next to the Clintons in Fayetteville. Apparently, my uncle mowed the lawn for their wedding, but they forgot to pay him, according to my mom. My granny was devastated when Hillary lost, and kept saying how she was the smartest, kindest woman she'd ever met, and that she was just super nerdy and got nervous in public or something. And for the record, my granny is actually the nicest, smartest woman ever, so that compliment is saying a lot. Apparently, Bill kissed my mom once when he came to the place and she was working and saw she was having a bad day. He counseled her and they had a moment. She confirmed he was, quote, very charming. Fast forward to the 90s and he came to Florida to campaign. My mother got dolled up and dragged me in the hot, humid Florida swamp heat to stand outside for 5 hours to meet him. Apparently, Hillary gave her a bit of a glare as they said their reunited hellos. But they both remembered my mom, were super nice, and they still need to pay my uncle. Story 106. I'm from Canada, therefore this is going to be a hockey story. I grew up in a town in Ontario, Canada, and I knew a number of NHL players before they hit the big leagues. During the off-season, NHL players would come back home. I was in high school when Rob Blake, LA Kings, played with Gretzky, came back to visit his parents. He decided to have a house party, and me and my friends went to the party. I was amazed because when we showed up, there was Gretzky. His parents live in a town 20 minutes away. Rob Blake, Nelson Emerson, St. Louis Blues, Marty McSorley, LA Kings, sitting in a hot tub playing a game called Century Club, a shot of beer every minute for a 100 minutes. I was invited to play and lasted about 30 shots before I had to quit. Even though I knew these guys before they made it to the NFL, except Gretzky, and now they were all millionaires, they acted like we were another bunch of small-town country boys. Story 107. My wife was friends with Stephanie Meyer. Before the fandom hit its big boom, during the first book and right after the second, Stephanie was really close to a lot of readers and fans. My wife was close friends with Stephanie's cousin, and when the second book came out, they went to the Forks book signing. My wife ended up driving Stephanie and her cousin all over Forks to see the signs and meet up with other fans. Stephanie got her number and they stayed in touch. She said Stephanie was really nice and humble, warm and fun, very relatable as a wife and mom. My wife saw her as a friend as opposed to a celebrity she knew. My wife became a beta leader for the third book and is cited in the after credits. She helped Stephanie with a few signings she had in different cities and had dinner with Stephanie and her publicist a few times. They stayed in touch until the movies. At that point, Stephanie pretty much broke contact with all the OG fans she had relationships with. My wife understands. We've talked about all the pressures and changes that led up to her becoming much more private. It didn't help that many of the early fans frankly took advantage of their relationships with her. Stephanie's really had her trust violated. She's been through more than her fans realize. Combine that with the challenges of being launched in a celebrity status while still being a mom and wife, along with a troll culture that never left her alone, and my wife understands her choice to ghost a lot of the old community. My wife still has a hard time talking about it, but has nothing bad to say about Stephanie. More than anything, she feels like she lost a friend. She hopes Stephanie never saw her as a sycophant. My wife still has beta reader copies that she won't let others read and won't tell people about even when she ends up in a Twilight conversation. She's still a fan and loves Stephanie's other books. Even our kids have started reading her. As a husband, it was hard to watch, but we both recognized the factors that led up to it. Still fans, still nothing bad to say about her. If my wife got a call from Stephanie one day, I think they'd pick right up where they left off and talk about how their kids are doing. Story 108. Y'all will like this, I think. I grew up in South Florida near old Trump's stomping grounds. I had a coworker who worked one day a week at Mar-a-Lago in a sitting room answering phone calls for VIPs reservations. Trump was on tour of the facility with the manager shortly after he bought it, and when they walked by, he asked what she did and said something to the effect of, "Nothing personal, the front desk can do that job. We need to save money and are letting you go." She really didn't care, as it was a pretty pointless position. A second story involving an older postal delivery guy who liked to spend his money in the strip clubs, as he wasn't married and had no kids. His words. Rachel's Steakhouse, very upscale strip club, in WPB was a spot of Trump's. He would sit at the high tops to avoid having to tip the girls on stage or the bartender, and would only tip his waitress a small amount compared to most of the other folks. Have heard the same thing. He says he never drank, though. Story 109. Reading all these jolted a memory loose that I hadn't thought about in years. Around 2005-ish, I hung out with Jim Carrey's daughter, Jane, from his first marriage, and the younger brother from Not Another Teen Movie a few times. Met at a mutual friend's wedding, and she hit it off with my SO's mom. Jane ended up coming to visit my SO and her mom once or twice. She was really down to earth and funny, played the guitar really well. She sat at our table at the wedding, but the bride's mother made us all pretend we didn't know who she was. At some point in the night, someone asked the group our favorite movies, and when it got to her turn, she said, "Dumb and Dumber, duh," and we all busted out laughing, and then she started talking about how it was to grow up with him as a dad during that time. She grew up watching the same movies we watched, but it was her dad. Weird. Anyway, we all hung out the entire weekend. It was a lot of fun. On one of her visits to my SO's house, I had walked outside to grab something from my car and accidentally interrupted her on speakerphone with her dad. I heard his voice and immediately took me back to watching The Mask, Ace Ventura, and Liar Liar on repeat my entire childhood. I was so excited, but just turned around and awkwardly walked back in the house. It was awesome. A year or so later, broke up with the GF and have no idea if she still remains in contact with Jane. I wish them both well. Thanks for knocking that memory loose, Reddit. Story 110. Lived next to, kind of, and worked for Robert Duvall over a decade and a half ago. He owned a quaint little place called the Rail Stop in the Plains, Virginia. Biggest jerk ever. I lasted about a week or so there at his place. My parents wound up building their dream home, and his property was because both properties are huge, a mile or so down the same road to their property. But I left the job that he owned and worked at another restaurant for years. About 2 years into my job at the new place, he came and sat in my section. As soon as I went to introduce myself, he interrupted and said he knew who I was and to fetch him some coffee. Dude didn't even leave a tip. Honestly, if you're from my small town though, you've seen him many times. He's always out and about. Rarely, if ever, have I seen him speak to someone with a smile on his face. Rude all around. One of my friends worked as a chef at his place and worked there for years. Said the guy rarely ever spoke to him then either. Story 111. I know one of Tiger Woods' mistresses from the big scandal. She was a very sweet girl when we were close, and from what I gather from her sister, she's still the same. I know other celebrities, but I wouldn't call them that. A reality show person is what I'd call them, and they're fairly different now due to drugs. But my cousin went to high school with Cuba Gooding Jr. My cousin used to give him rides to and from school, and they would occasionally stop at McDonald's for a cheeseburger. Cuba rarely had the money for a burger, so my cousin would buy him one when they went. He considered him a buddy from school. Several years later, my cousin, who was a police officer, was working security at an event. Cuba, a now famous actor, walked past him before the event, and my cousin said hi and reintroduced himself. Cuba acted like he didn't know my cousin and didn't really even care to remember or make the conversation. Broke my cousin's heart because he had always kind of been proud of Cuba and how far he had come. I asked my cousin if it was possible that over time Cuba could have just met so many people and possibly forgotten, and my cousin said he doubted it because they spent quite a lot of time together. Story 112. My mom used to work at Coffee Bean in Studio City, and a lot of celebrities would come in regularly. Eddie Murphy is generous and friendly. He would leave a $100 tip weekly. He even took a pic with my mom. Gabriel Iglesias is exactly how you see him on screen. Just an all-around nice, jolly guy. Tim Allen is rude, though. He would get pissy when his order of a medium coffee and a large cup would be wrong. My mom apparently told him to chill and to pull him aside to tell him whenever he came into the shop so that she can get his order right. I spend the day at the restaurant once to see if I could meet Eddie Murphy or Gabriel. Red Foo ends up walking in with an entourage. My mom shrieks and said that he reminded her of her friends and how they all dressed. She didn't know who he was, and he was here for it.